The following happened in Canyondeshe in Arizona, back around 2010. I know there's a lot of rumors out there about skinwalkers. I didn't believe in them. Well, it's not that I didn't. I just don't believe that they're creatures, cryptids, or monsters. They are evil medicine men who practice witchcraft. Those are the ones that I believe in. But regardless of what I believe, you gotta admit, there's other things out there in the places of Arizona that can't be explained. So the business of my family often takes us deep into the Navajo Rez. I am Danette, by the way. And sometimes when we're out there, we spend the nights at a friend's or family's place. There's no argument that those roads are not always safe for travelers, and even to locals after the sun sets. I know quite a few people who had dangerous encounters out there, and my first encounter with one wasn't the type that you read or hear about. On one of these trips, we decided to attend an evening rug auction. They were beautiful, by the way. It took us a few hours out of town, and somehow on this day, I just felt different. Let me just tell you what happened. On the way before getting there, I stopped at a gas station to pump gas. The last thing you want to do is be stranded out in the middle of fucking nowhere. When I was coming out the gas station, I must have not seen her when I felt someone tugging on my shirt. When I turned to see who it was a long-haired woman. I couldn't tell how old she was, but I ignored her and I kept walking. And then she was like, "Anna, come here." I stopped, looked at her and told her, "You got the wrong person." She continued walking towards me. I turned and started walking back to my truck. So then I hear her start to walk fast after me, asking me, "Hey, what's your name? I know you. I know your name. It's Mary, Elizabeth, Becky, Bella." Right when she said the last part of my name, I turned to her again, and she was like, "It's Bella, right?" I was like, "You got the wrong person." And I continued walking. I could still hear her behind me. That's when she started yelling, "I know you. I know who you are, you little fucking whore." I jumped in. I slammed the door and locked it, and I put it in drive. As I drove away, I gave her the middle finger, and I blasted my music out loud. She started dancing to it. Pretty funny. I fucking hate stopping at these gas stations. At this point, I'm riding by myself, heading out to pick up my friend Jenny. Her mom lived closer out to Canyondeshe, and we were going to visit for a few days as well. I picked her up just before sundown, and we started heading out. I do want to make a note that Jenny is not your normal friend. She's one of the more superstitious natives that I know. On previous driving trips, she has begged me to stop the car and take a different road after noticing an owl flying towards it. But I don't really put too much stock in omens. Also, whenever this would happen, we always ended up taking 1 or 2 detours because of something that she felt or saw. Anywho, when we got there, the auction hadn't ended by 9 p.m. or so, and Jenny and I were ready to leave. We decided to head back to her mother's place. We switched seats and now Jenny was gonna drive. Plus, she's more familiar with these roads at night. Jenny had put on the least fuzzy station she could find, and I was staring out the window. Looking back, I wish we would have waited or not left that night, because this is when it happened. As we drove, I was looking out the window, not really sure how to explain it. This is why all these colonized skinwalker bullshit stories piss me the fuck off. I was looking out the window when I started dozing off. At least I thought I was. It was strange. I started seeing like a black shadow, or maybe a black shape. It was forming beside the window. It was like a dark cloud. It was floating, forming. I was still looking out the window when I reached over to tap Jenny to have her take a look at it. When I did, I swear, the shadow, it threw something towards my window, like an airball or something. It made me flinch. The only feeling I can describe is when you're falling asleep and you get hit with that violent shake, that feeling. When I did, I remember losing my breath and consciousness. I opened my eyes, and that's when I noticed this fucking dog. A big dark gray German Shepherd was running next to us. It started getting closer until it was running on two legs like a human. When it turned its head to look at me, my stomach dropped. Now, I know what you're thinking. Why didn't you look away or do something? But here's the crazy part. I felt paralyzed. I couldn't fucking move. I couldn't even close my eyes. All I remember was feeling terrified. Have you ever had sleep paralysis? Fuck. All I felt was this huge wave of fear. I must have made a noise or something because Jenny touched my leg and she asked what was wrong. I'm not sure if she was able to wake me up or something. I was able to move my head to her, and then I pointed out the window. But as I turned back, the dog was gone. Not wanting to scare her, I told her that the darkness was playing tricks on me, but she knew I was lying because I had tears rolling down. She asked me what happened, and I kept trying to avoid her, but she was like, "You can lie to me, but don't lie to yourself. I know something happened." And that's when I told her. That's when she said we needed to hurry to her mom's place, and the whole time she kept looking everywhere, but didn't say anything. I was still scared. When we got there, her mom was waiting on us. She knew we were coming over already, but Jenny told her what happened and what I saw. We went inside and Jenny's mother and father told me that we were gonna smudge and pray, which we did. Her parents told me not to be afraid, that whatever it was will continue to bother me as long as they know that I'm afraid. That's what they feed off of. They gave me a whole speech as well. If you thought Jenny was superstitious, her parents were like up there, you can say. Her dad told me that I need to check my heart and find out what's going on. He also told me that if I saw something that I wasn't supposed to not act like I didn't see it. And this is where I fucked up. The next night, I saw that dog again. After a lot of food and even more visiting, I ended up staying in a trailer home. Jenny's family had 3 in their land. It was the guest room, you can say. They wanted me to have privacy, and they told me I could have it by myself. Jenny was fine with this, as it was hers whenever she came over to visit. I started getting ready for bed. I turned off my light, and then I went to the window to pull down the shades so that the light wouldn't keep me up. Fear hit me like a sucker punch when my eyes drifted across. Out in the distance, there was that fucking gray dog. It was standing on its hind legs, and it was staring straight back at me. I'm not sure how long we looked at one another. I knew better than to stare at it, but I was too terrified to turn away. And then it dropped down to all fours and walked away. I slept with my pocket knife next to my bed. There was no way I was going to leave that place. The next morning, of course, I told Jenny. And Jenny told her parents what happened. And that's when everything kind of shifted, you can say. Her dad got real quiet and said that we needed to go see a medicine man. All of us. And so basically the whole day was spent traveling, going to the medicine man. When we got there, they brought us inside the hogan. The medicine man said to tell them everything we did, anything that we had bought, who we came across and all. And that's when I mentioned the crazy woman at the gas station. And almost like a light bulb going off, they knew this was it. I won't tell details of the ceremony, but basically we got cleansed. The medicine man said it wasn't just an animal that I saw. He said it was a yenagloshi, and he basically said not to show fear, not to acknowledge it, not to pay attention to it, because that's what they feed off of. The medicine man said that this woman is something that a lot of people do. He said that she wanted to know my name. He said that sometimes these people will write your name at the bottom of their foot and scream curses as they stomp on your name, trying to kill you. He told us to continue praying and to not worry about this anymore. But he also told us that out here deep in the res, don't ever let a random stranger know your name. I guess be safe whenever you stop at gas stations. So there's a place in Kentucky called Beaver Creek, which is a boring tourist location. But there's a more remotely accessed road called Lynch Ford. A few fishermen go there, but there's never more than 10 cars at a time, at least in my short experience. I had a falling out with my family, so I moved here to get away from the insanity, to not be bored, and to fill my belly. I went looking for places to fish. I didn't know many people around here, so I had to go look for places on my own. I pulled up the maps and looked around for creeks and rivers on the satellite image until I found Elk Creek, which then led me to Beaver Creek. I ended up Googling more to find the resort. I didn't want to be around people though. I just needed to be alone, really. I figured I had too much FaceTime with my family, as it were, and I wasn't really interested in socializing. So I got in my car. I drove around sort of aimlessly until I found Lynch Ford Road, which ends at a remote section of Beaver Creek. For a whole month, I went fishing there Monday through Thursday, getting some massive bluegill. Perfect for getting a thick enough cut of boneless meat to batter and deep fry. I also caught the occasional log perch, drum, and largemouth bass. But I was more focused on the gloriously tasty bluegill. A lot of fishermen laugh at the thought of bluegill fishing since it's considered baby's first catch, but they taste better than any other freshwater fish that I ever ate. I got a real taste for them, and I even felt compelled to return to the creek to keep my freezer full. I didn't like going on the weekends because teenagers often set up camp and party all weekend, and that's exactly what I like to avoid. However, I decided to go on a Friday evening, and I noticed a distinct lack of humans. No one was there. I was thrilled. I went back Saturday evening and was again surprised that there was nobody there. Awesome. I had the entire creek to myself again, and so I loaded myself down with some delicious fish. At that time, I didn't find anything suspicious. I mean, it was the weekend, and there were no party folks around. I took a few days off the other week to catch up on some other evening things like weed eating and mowing the lawn. I went back to Beaver Creek again that Thursday. As I was driving my car down the narrow county road to the creek, I met a truck that was barreling down mad and almost clipped my car. I assumed they were young, possibly even drunk or on meth, or maybe a combination of both. So I just went down to my favorite spot. There's a not great dirt road that goes the length of the creek, but it's all beat up from people getting their trucks stuck in the mud, so it's impossible for me to drive my car. So I always park my car in the gravel parking lot and just walk with all my gear down the dirt road. I got there around 6:30 p.m. and went down to a really nice spot where a small stream falls into the creek in a shallow waterfall. The spot is a bit shy of half a mile from my car. On my way there, I noticed some weird looking tracks in the mud. They looked human, but they were a bit skinny and curved terribly inward. I wasn't sure how to write that off as normal. The tracks led off down the road and into the weeds towards the woods, where I couldn't follow. I was a bit concerned about it, but I did have some mace and an old-timer hunting knife, just in case anybody wanted a piece of me. So I just continued to my little waterfall spot. I set up my fishing chair and dropped my line in the water. I wasn't getting a lot of bites at first, so my eyes began wandering around. They went over the banks and the mountainside. Now sometimes when I'm out there, I see and hear a lot of things. The sound of blue jays, crickets ramping up for the evening, and all sorts of other nature sounds. Except this time, It was much more quiet. At this point, I began to worry a little, but maybe it was just the cool weather causing the lack of nature sounds. With the absence of party folks, other fishermen, and the locals that walked down to the creek and swim, I wonder if maybe there was something going on down there that everybody knew about except for me. The odd tracks in the mud, the truck tearing ass away from the creek, and now the sounds of nature gone. Everything was getting to me. But then, suddenly, the fish began to bite, one after another. I reeled in some fat bluegill. I spent the next hour loading up my fish bucket. All my feelings went away. If you're a fellow fisherman reading this, you'll understand exactly what I mean. It was getting dark and difficult to see to pull out the hook from the fish. This was nothing new to me. I often stayed a little after dark with no incident if the fish were still biting. As luck would have it, I was trying to grab hold of a large and feisty bluegill when it fell in my hand. I reacted and swore really loud. I shook it off and continued my business. Now, almost in reply, I heard a response from the woods behind me. It yelled out the same cuss word that I did. It sounded male, but with a very unfamiliar accent. It had somewhat of a analog sound, like a tape being played back, but not quite in my voice. I froze in place, still holding my reel with a grip. I started to panic, but I tried to stay calm and listen. A fish began tugging at my line, but I ignored it. I slowly reeled it in, missing it, and I laid my rod and reel down. I unclipped my knife from its holster on my belt, and I uncapped and turned the head of my mace in my pocket. I stood with my eyes fixed in the way that this voice came from. I strained to listen, and I could hear some sounds out there, but I couldn't see anything. With the tiniest bit of sunset left, I grabbed my mag light out of my backpack. As soon as I grabbed my flashlight, I heard what sounded like snorting coming from the way that I heard the voice. It sounded like two people, grunting also. Still having that tape recorded quantity, it kept getting closer. I grew a pair and clicked on the flashlight, but I wasn't ready for what I would see. I started scanning the light in front of me, and I worked my way towards the noises. At first, I caught a glimpse of a white humanoid bobbing slowly behind the trees. I was scared out of my mind. My hands were shaking so hard that I couldn't keep the flashlight trained on the thing very well. The thing then hobbled to a point where the trees were skinny enough to see past, and I got a good look at it. The only thing I could even begin to compare it to is that it looked like some fairly young conjoined twins. It had two almost human heads, a broad torso, and two messed up legs. It was naked and pale, and it was staring directly at me, one of the heads still making that faint snorting noise. As I stood there shaking terribly, it drew in a deep breath. It made the most awful, two-headed howling noise I ever heard. It lunged towards me a bit, then its head turned to look at each other. I was completely losing my shit at this point. Never in my life have I run so fast, yet it felt like I was taking forever to get to my car. It was dark at this point, and it felt like the woods were getting bigger, darker, and deeper. I was trying my best not to trip or slide in the mud, or fall somewhere in the road. Once I got close to my car, I looked back with the flashlight, and I saw this thing walking across the road to the spot where I left my fishing gear. I stopped only for that moment. Then I got in my car and peeled the hell out of there as fast as I could. That shit was just so unnatural to me. I'm not sure if it was just an inbred hillbilly thing, or if it was some terrible hell spawn. Laugh all you want, but if you were there, and you saw it, you would have been running like hell. I just don't want to ever see that thing again. The shadow people. Have you heard about them? Have you ever experienced any? You might want to skip this till daytime if you're listening to it at night or before bed. Now, do I think they're real? Absolutely. I can't remember when or at what point, but I always assumed they could be good or bad. But after speaking with people within the last few years, my mindset has changed on them. You know those random paintings, drawings, or frames of landscapes that our parents or grandparents will have around? I don't keep none of those. My grandma told me this crazy ass story, which I believe her because they wouldn't lie about it. Isn't it crazy that our elders experienced some creepy shit growing up? The times have changed, and I'm grateful because my grandparents and other elders have some crazy ass stories. But anyways, there's this painting in my grandma's house, and it's a landscape of just two teepees, and it's hanging in her hallway. She said that one night she walked by it, and it caught her eye. She turns and looks at it, and there's about 8 or 10 black shadow figures standing around the biggest teepee. She got pretty scared and had my uncles come look, but all of the figures were no longer there. So they just went about their night all freaked out and went to bed. They all got woken up by the police banging on their door and surrounding the place with flashlights. And then my grandma goes to see what's going on. Apparently, a neighbor has seen about 10 people standing all around her house. By the time the police got there, they were all gone. My grandparents are still alive, and my grandma never told me what they ended up doing with that painting or what this meant. Does anybody know? I bet those shadows were the ones knocking. I think I was around 26 when this happened. I became the owner of a large land west of Hunter Valley and a huge amount of cash after my grandfather's passing. After a while, I decided, screw it, I'm gonna settle out there and I'm gonna become self-sufficient. It was also just to be alone and be left alone by other people. So I bought some chickens, some goats, and just for fun, just because I was able to, a mule. I ended up loving him beyond all belief, and he was already saddle trained by the time that I got him. I ended up naming him Jack. A few months later, I was part of a hiking club up in the Blue Mountains. I was kind of an oddball, since most of the other members of the group that I rode with were young girls and their ponies, normally alongside one or both of their parents. It was like this for all of them except for our supervisor, or guide, Noah. He was an aboriginal guy with a rough-cut water horse. He went by the name of Steel. Most hikes always ended up with me sticking to the back of the pack and talking with Noah. This went on for a few months. I was practically a supervisor myself after a while. I was often asked to help out with issues on the road, always pulling up younger riders on their rein and saddle or foot positions, or de-spooking other horses. I came to really appreciate how calm and collected Jack was in comparison. Noah ended up trusting me. He saw that I had my life together. He asked me if I wanted to come on a multi-day trip through the national park with some other group. I thought this would be a good time to be around some other experienced riders, and I was right. I got everything ready. I got there with Jack. I was greeted by Noah and a bunch of older, much more experienced riders with actual full-size horses. Everything went well the first day. Cut to the night. Everyone had hitched their animals, and we had set up camp for the night. I think it was around 2 a.m. I was a light sleeper, by the way. I was immediately aware that something had severely spooked one of the horses. I heard stamping, whining. Whichever horse it was making a real scene. All the other horses were awake. When I got out there, since I realized that nobody else was going to, I ended up getting scared myself, as the horses didn't seem to calm down right away, even with my own methods. It started kicking behind itself. I had a flashlight on me, and I checked behind it. That's when I heard sort of a thumping scuttle from whatever it was, and then I saw some leaves being kicked up from the upper corners of my flashlight beam. I assumed it was just a wombat or something like that. It definitely sounded like one too, and they're pretty common around here. Anyways, after this, I go back to my camp, and I wake up tired in the morning. Noah tells everybody that this is going to be the longest part, and it will likely take until the late evening to get to the next campsite. I saddle up Jack, and we get on with it. We're walking all day. There's a few stops that we make for water and breaks. The sun starts setting as we get close to the next site. This is when Jack starts acting up in the middle of the trail. I had just noticed that he had picked up a load of ticks on one of his legs. This was on the same foot that he busted a shoe on a few days before the trip, and he was still getting used to the new one. I tell Noah that I'm going to deal with this. He wants everyone to stop. I just tell him that they should continue, and that it won't be long. The trail is pretty obvious from here. I know he trusts me enough to know what I'm doing, but he still pleads with me to not get lost along the way. He says that he'll leave a fire or something going so I can find them. I then get to picking. Somehow, I didn't notice that Jack apparently had a small nick as well, which is what attracted all of the ticks. I pick out all of them from his leg. I end up cleaning his wound and patching him up, and then I check his shoe. All of this takes around 20 minutes, but it was 20 minutes that we didn't have. The sun was just barely there now. I could barely see the trail. I was looking for the light of a fire or something up ahead, but there was nothing. You guessed it. We ended up on the side of a mountain for 15 minutes, not knowing where the hell we were going. Then Jack, suddenly in the middle of what was supposed to be the trail, gives a quick snort and then just stops. His ears are pricked directly forward. I give him a tap and try to get him to move a bit. Nothing. I gently tug on his reins to get him to focus, and then give him a tap and try to get him to move forward a bit. He's completely seized up. I know this animal very well, and I know that he only does this if something has really scared him. At this point I start to feel very uneasy myself. I pull on his reins a little harder. Jack turns his head very slightly towards me, only just enough that I can see the whites of his eyes are fully exposed. I'm scared now. There's a small noise heard in front of us. Jack snaps his head forward again. He then moves his front feet. I keep talking to him softly and patting him, trying to calm him down. I think I was just trying to reassure myself more than the mule. That's when I became aware of something. The silence. Complete quietness. No owls or possums calling out. No frogs. No crickets even. Nothing but my own slightly labored breathing. I then hear what sounds like a small rock moving behind us. This is when Jack flinches and starts slowly stepping back. Instantly, I hear that same scuttle that I heard before, coming at us from behind and in front. That's when Jack loses it. He makes a sound I have never heard come from an animal before or since. He jumps a whole foot in the air with a sprawling rear-legged kick, almost completely throwing me from the saddle. He bolts down the mountain at a new speed. Meanwhile, during that jump, one of my boots gets caught in the stirrup. I'm being dragged over jagged rocks down a mountain at immense speed by my left leg that's still attached to the saddle of a terrified mule. I'm now covering my head with my arm, and I swear, that sound is directly next to us. I can barely see anything. It's almost completely dark, just enough to make out leaves and rocks being kicked up about a meter beside us. Whatever this thing is, it's managing to keep pace with us. I'm desperately trying to grab into anything I can pull myself back up. I'm then able to grab what I can only assume is the saddle flap, and I hoist myself up just a little bit. It was a terrible idea. My arm, which was protecting my head, makes contact with a massive rock out of the ground. My wrist ends up getting dislocated. It hurt so fucking bad. Not a moment later, the sound to my side gets much louder, and I feel what I can only picture to be a talon strike the side of my head, making a deep cut just above my temple. One might assume it was another rock, but trust me, that wasn't no rock. Jack then cries out and almost tramples me, trying not to trip over himself. I was then somehow able to flail my body upward enough to gain enough clarity to grab onto the saddle without my legs slipping, and then I hoist myself back up with one hand. Basically, I was clinging to Jack for dear life now. My face keeps getting hit by tree branches as well. And then finally, we're able to get to the bottom of the mountain, directly into the camp that we were trying to find the whole time. I didn't even notice the light of the bonfire that we were getting to. I had my head down, focused on the trees, trying not to get hit, and whatever this thing was next to us. Jack also apparently didn't expect this, because when he suddenly hit flat ground after the downward incline, he completely stopped, throwing me from my saddle and into the hard, stony dirt below. Jack was fine. I was not. Talk about getting beat up by your best friend. He got up almost immediately. He started kicking and scaring all the other horses, sending everyone in the camp into a panic. I just lay there for a moment, even though I was trying to get up and run. Noah then gets to me, hands all over me, trying to set me right. In his defense, I did in fact have blood streaming from the side of my head. I was covered in deep scratches and I had a limp wrist. I was able to wheeze out. Hand me a flashlight. A flashlight? You need a damn doctor. And then say again, hand me a flashlight. I could still hear it. The scuttling. The noises. It was still there. It was moving around the camp. In between all the noises of the horses, all the people talking, some of them panicking all over the place, I could still hear it. I knew it was there, pacing around the edges of the fire's light. I get handed my flashlight. I could hear it about 10 meters away. I then shine the light directly at where I knew it was, but there's nothing. Nothing except a flurry of leaves and small twigs were kicking up, almost like it skittered away. I turned off my flashlight and turned to Noah, and then tell him, we can't stay here tonight. He then says, what do you mean? I stand up and look him dead in the face. We can't stay here tonight. I actually don't remember much after that. I know that Noah patched me up and acted very creeped out. We were actually forced to stay there for the night, but I refused to let anyone douse the fire. And everyone and their horses were up all night. Everyone blamed me for being tired the next morning and having to cut the trip short so I could get proper medical attention. I didn't care. Oh well. All I remember doing is sitting on a log, listening to this thing or these things that were circling our camp until sunrise. And then we spent about 4 days in a hospital while my brother took care of Jack. I do still go riding with Jack, but to that place, never again. After much wavering and second guessing, I finally bit the bullet and went back to graduate school last fall. I'm sure some of you know how difficult it can be to juggle a PhD program and a full-time job. I was going to need a small source of income, but I wanted something that would allow school to be my first priority. As luck would have it, a good friend of mine knew a family in desperate need of a babysitter. Their current sitter had recently graduated high school and was heading out of state for college. Initially, I felt a little odd accepting work as a babysitter. After all, I was in my mid-20s, a PhD student, and I was also engaged to be married. But hell, the hours were flexible, the money was fantastic, and I could anticipate a great deal of solid study hours after the kid was sleeping. To be quite honest, It was very easy from the start. The family was generous with their money, and their 3-year-old daughter, Allison, was quite well behaved. Over the next few months, I found myself up there several times a week, mostly helping Renee, the mother, so that she could run errands and catch a coffee break. I would also help on the weekends, so the parents could enjoy a date night to the movies. I wasn't especially fond of the weekend night shifts, especially because the family lived in a large home, high up in the mountains, surrounded by acres and acres of trees. During the day, their heavily wooded property was serene and majestic, but once darkness fell, it was eerie in its silence. I tried not paying attention to the noises of forest animals brushing past bushes, or the snapping of tree branches whenever the wind would do its rounds. Mostly, I was just around on my laptop, or burying my nose in a textbook until I was relieved to go home. But everything changed this past February. It was a cold Saturday evening, and I was supposed to babysit around 7 that night. Renee's husband, Eric, was out of town on business, and she was excited to share a night out with the girlfriends. Armed with a backpack of heavy reading, I had my fiancé, Mark, drop me off on his way to the gym. The night felt different. I heated up some frozen pizza. I drew a bath with an embarrassing amount of bubbles, and I had the kid in bed by 8. I also had an exam the following Tuesday, and so I had a lot of studying to conquer. My fiancé arrived around 9:50, about 10 minutes before I was expecting Renee back home. Right at 10 o'clock, and I mean on the nose, we heard footsteps on the wraparound deck, and I noticed Renee making her way to the front door. I remember finding it funny that I was so focused that I didn't even hear her Suburban drive up. Mark and I looked at each other as Renee made her way into the living room. It appeared that she had too many glasses of wine, because she had this intoxicating, frozen grin on her face. First I chalked it up to the alcohol, but when the grin wouldn't go away, I started to feel uncomfortable. The way a stranger staring from across a restaurant can make you feel. Renee was always very chatty, but tonight, all her answers were short, but still polite enough. I began to gather my things as my fiancé continued a game of solitaire on his phone. Renee then sat at the dining table, that bizarre and creepy grin still plastered to her face. She wrote me out a check. There was something painfully uncanny about her movements. They were rigid, forced. By the time that we got down to the driveway, my fiancé and I both had baffled looks on our faces. Renee stood in the window, smiling down on us, waving her hand back and forth. I gave a short nod and waved, keeping my eyes on the gravel. That discomfort wasn't letting go. We walked past Renee's silver Suburban, taking note of how dusty it was. This was strange, especially for somebody who seemed to take her car in for a wash at least once a week. I traced my finger across the passenger door, leaving a light coat of soot on the pad of my index finger. The car was dirty, like it had been through the elements. Where the hell did she go tonight? Through a sandstorm? I joked. Seriously, Mark said. I'm not the only person who found that whole thing weird, right? I asked, attempting to keep my voice to a whisper. She must have had too many drinks. Now, her smile. That, he said, closing the driver's door. We began our trek down the roads. The drive from their house to the freeway was dark, lined up with redwoods and deer, which I always quite enjoyed. Tonight, it seemed endless. I had this overwhelming, new desire to be on that highway, surrounded by other cars, around other drivers and passengers, heading into the city. We then drove for what seemed like too long. Something wasn't right. I reached for my phone and glanced at the time. We were passing the first gas station by now. I pawed at the handle of my purse, for the first time noticing the bag's weight. Fuck, I had totally forgot my textbook. I didn't want to turn around when we had already been driving for so long. I made amends with the fact that I needed that textbook. That's if I wanted to rock my exam. Mark then let out a groan as he swung the wheel, turning back the way that we came. Climbing the hill to Renee's house, I saw that the Suburban was no longer in the driveway. She must have moved it inside for the night already. As we made our way to the deck, I saw the burgundy spine of my textbook on the couch through the sliding glass door. I continued on to the front door and knocked 3 times. No answer. I knocked again, and then tried the door handle. It was unlocked. Just like I always left it while Renee and her husband were out. We made our way into the house, making sure to keep our footsteps quiet. "Sorry, it's just me. I forgot my book," I said. I was trying to keep my voice down. My fiancée was right behind me, peeking around the corner. "Her bedroom door is open, but the lights are off," Mark said, a confused look spreading across his face. "Renee," I asked. "Renee," a little louder this time. "Renee, it's me. Are you still awake?" "Nothing." We walked to the kitchen. I hadn't noticed it before I left. There wasn't any phone calls that night. Not exactly sure what compelled me to push play, especially when, for all I knew, Renee and Allison were both asleep, and they could end up being waking up. I moved my finger over to that button for a mere second before I pushed it in. What I heard on that recording has never, ever left me. The timestamp of the voice message was 10:14. We had left the house at 5 after 10. "Hey sweetie, it's Renee. There's some kind of hold up on the highway here. Maybe an accident or something. I'll most likely be a half hour later than expected. I'm so sorry. Help yourself to some dessert while you wait. And I hope Allison didn't give you too much grief tonight." Her voice sounded normal, real. I looked at Mark. My heart sank. My eyes flooded with tears. Allison." It took me a while to say it. Mark disappeared up the staircase to Allison's room, taking steps 3 at a time. After a painfully long minute, he came down the stairs, much slower than he had ascended them. "She's fine. She's sleeping," Mark said. Mark and I found our way to the living room, where we sat without eye contact or conversation until Renee pulled up the driveway. She seemed exhausted, glad to be home and off the congested road. She talked to us about her evening, wrote me a check with a generous tip. She said thanks for my patience, and she smiled. The kind of smile that seemed real. And then she slowly faded when socially appropriate. We stumbled down to our car in a daze, passing Renee's Suburban, which still gleamed from a recent trip, to the car wash. I never did have the heart to tell Renee what happened. I also never found the first check from the grinning woman. I ended up canceling the next 2 times when I was supposed to babysit. Then, I finally emailed Renee, telling her that my program was getting especially intense, and I didn't think it's best to continue sitting for them. She bought the story, and now, I'm free from that darkness that surrounded that home in the mountains, where I once met a woman who wouldn't stop smiling. My dad told me that lechuzas only come around when someone places a curse or a hex on you. Either way, them being around can't be good. I remember when I was young, I had an encounter with a lechuza. It happened in the middle of the night. and everyone was asleep except for me. I had stayed up watching cartoons or Adult Swim, and I remember the TV had suddenly turned off by itself. I tried everything from plugging it in and out, pressing all the buttons. Then, all of a sudden, I had this ugly gut feeling that I wasn't alone. That's when the light coming through the window disappeared for a moment, like if something big enough flew by to cover the whole window. I swear when this happened, I heard a flapping sound, and then it got quiet. I sat there, in fear, and then I started hearing these heavy thumps coming from the roof. It almost sounded like if somebody was hopping around slowly on the roof. This is why I'm still careful about hearing noises at night on the roof. It might not be coming from the attic, and it might just be somebody, or something, up there. I got the strength to work my way towards the window, and I tried to see if I could spot whatever was making that noise. The sound stopped, and then suddenly came what I will never forget. The air was filled with a loud whistle. It wasn't like a high-pitched one. It was a low-pitched but loud whistle. Almost sounded like a man raising his pitch by one before losing it back down. It was just doing this, and I could tell it was definitely coming from the roof. Whatever this thing was, it flew off the roof and landed in a tree that was across from my window. This thing was massive. It must have had a wingspan of 10 to 15 feet, and it looked like it was 6 feet tall when it perched up on the branch. I could only make out the silhouette at first, but when the whistling came from the trees, I noticed that whatever this bird was, it had the face of a human. It was a little off. The eyes a little beadier, and the nose appeared to be gone, but it resembled that of a human head. I ran to my parents' room when I saw that, but they told me to be quiet and to pray to God, and then it would fly away. That's when I learned they were called lechuzas, a witch that had a bird-like body. They told me it always came around children, and the reason for that was because they could easily manipulate electronics, such as tools and other things, meaning they would be able to go inside a home, take the kid, and the parents wouldn't be able to do anything. My parents also said that lechuzas will snatch you up and fly you through the air, only to land somewhere to eat through your guts. But since they are witches, praying will cause them to leave you alone, as they don't like it. Anyways, me and my parents prayed quietly until the whistling eventually stopped. I don't remember much after that, other than falling asleep, but I would have more encounters like this coming home from a store late at night, seeing a large winged creature flying over me, before disappearing into the trees in the distance, before whistling that same ugly tune, or when I was lying in bed trying to sleep, before hearing it land on my roof before the whistling. It's that fucking whistling that scares me. That's when they let you know that they know that you're awake, that they know that you're aware of them. My buddy's grandpa also had an encounter with them. It landed right on his porch as he was coming back from hunting late at night. He tried shooting the damn thing, but somehow the lechuza had used its power to jam the gun up when he tried to fire at it. As soon as he aimed the shotgun away, it fired on its own, and when he would try it again, the same thing would happen. So he just shouted and cussed at it, and that seemed to make it leave. Maybe it sensed that he had no fear to it. I'm not sure. No one really talks about lechuzas. Everyone's always busy with La Llorona or nahuales or other things. But I hope this may have some use to you. Be careful if you see them. I have a warning for you. Before you go ghost hunting, before you ever touch a Ouija board, before you shuffle those tarot cards, ask yourself, do you actually know what you're doing? The other night I was scrolling through TikTok, just scrolling before bed, and I came across somebody doing some live readings. This individual had thousands of people watching. The hearts were all over the screen, and I could see people in the comments begging to be picked. Is there a spirit around me? Is somebody attached to me? Can you see who's watching me? Is what all the comments were saying. And I just sat there thinking, you don't even know who's on the other side of that door that you're knocking on. Before you light sage because somebody online told you to, and because it seems to be the trendy thing to do right now, believe it or not, there's a proper way to do it. Starting from where you got the sage from. I have a friend who is Lakota, and she told me that you never buy sage, sacred medicine, and it's actually supposed to be given to you, or you can grow your own. There's a proper way to smudge, and there's a wrong way to smudge, and if you do it wrong, you can actually end up opening doors and causing harm instead of good. My grandpa was a medicine man. He has stories for days, but for now, I want to share with you this. He told me a story about one time when they were conducting a ceremony and something happened. But basically, I remember him saying that if you're not sure who or what the spirit is or what its intentions are, it's better to walk away. You know those famous ghost hunting shows? I'm not impressed by them. If anything, I think they're doing evil things. They stir up houses already troubled, and when they leave, they end up leaving the family's home worse than it was before. Also, my grandpa said to never challenge a spirit, never provoke them. If anything, most spirits ignore you. But there's also those that are not spirits. Demons are not alive. They never been. They have a total disregard for human life. Jealous, you might say. And if it's a demon that you're dealing with, they like to feed off your fear and your anger. If that's what you're in contact with, leave, and keep in mind, it will remember you, no matter how much time has passed, and it can follow you. There's so many different things in this world that you can never imagine. I remember my sister having a hard time shutting them out. She is a nurse, and she happens to work where people live and die, and the hospitals are full of them. So please walk in the light with the Creator. Always in the light, because darkness cannot put out its light. I am mixed, so that's my belief. Talk to your elders if you come across such things. They'll know what to do. Has anyone heard about the tall man on the Rez? He is evil. He goes by other names like Walking Sam, the tall man spirit. He's up in the Dakotas and should be left alone. Some say that he's a spirit that is attracted to negative energy. Some say that he convinces people to kill themselves. I remember first hearing about him when I lived in an old farmhouse in Minnesota. I got really depressed as a kid after that for no reason. Now I understand why. He takes young people. A friend of mine told me on the Pine Ridge Rest that she and her cousin saw the tall man one time, and that afternoon, she caught the same cousin trying to hang herself for no reason. She was in a trance and went to the basement, and there was a rope. She walked in just on time to stop her. She snapped out of it and had no idea what she was doing. To be honest, there's so many suicides at Standing Rock also. I lost 3 cousins back home. They were all young as well. Pine Ridge also has a high suicide rate. I think they put us on these lands that were quote-unquote haunted. Places that no one wanted to live there, so they just put us there. Anyways, I saw the tall man again, 2 days before my brother passed away. We had some thunderstorms and I saw him standing near a tree. When the lightning lit up the sky, you could see him. Unfortunately, my brother, he was part of the huge influx of suicides in the Pine Ridge back in the 2000s. Not sure if you ever heard this, but back in the mid-2010s, there were about 50 suicides in a few months. I'm not kidding. Look it up if you don't believe me. A lot of people were young, around 10 to 17. The news and media won't tell you because it doesn't bring attention or generate controversy. But we know the truth. It's mental struggles, addictions that have worked their way up here to the Rez. However, behind all of this, we also know there's more. I do remember that my brother told me that he wanted to go visit his ex-girlfriend and her family. He was also planning on getting a job while he was there, and he told me he was all proud of his new tribal ID card. The night before he passed away, he spent the whole day at my place with us. He was happy and joking around with the kids as well. He even helped me cook dinner for the kids. The next day, which I will never forget, I found him hanging in his room in my mother's basement. I tried to cut him down for the life of me, but I couldn't. The rope was so strong, so I ended up running outside to my sister's house to have her help me. But once I stepped outside, everything hit me at once. I started screaming his name and started crying so loud, which I hadn't realized it at this point. But I had made it to the street where I fell on my knees. My chest started to hurt and I couldn't catch my breath. My mother's neighbor must have heard me because she came over to ask me what was wrong. I told her I just found my brother hanging. I guess that statement didn't click with her because she ended up asking if he was okay. Or now that I think about it, maybe it wasn't even shocking no more, because there were a lot of suicides going on just about every single day. I told her no, that he's gone. She did help me call for help on her phone. I then told her I had to get to my sister's that lived a few houses down. She gave me a hug and I went on my way. I was knocking but no one was answering, so I started screaming her name, banging on her bedroom window, and then she finally came out. She had just woken up. I remember telling her that she had to help me. Meanwhile, she was asking what was going on. Do keep in mind that I was in a state of panic, so her husband also came out asking what happened. I told him that I needed help getting my brother down because he had hanged himself, and that I couldn't wait anymore, so I ran back over to my mother's place, where at this point, I found my mother screaming inside the house. The crazy part is that she didn't know anything. She had just woke up and walked over from my own place, where she would stay the night with me to help me with my children. But she said that she knew something was wrong. She said she could feel it. So she was gonna go over to check on him, and that's when she saw him. I remember his body was so cold, stiff like a rock. I couldn't believe it. My own sibling, which I had helped my single mother raise as well. He never showed no signs of anything. He was friendly, a happy person that loved life to the fullest. He never lost his faith. He believed in God. He believed in forgiving others and helping others that needed him. He loved his family, his nephews and nieces. He helped me a lot with my own kids that I will never forget. My oldest had taken it the worst because he didn't have his own dad in his life, but my brother was there for him as a father figure. But still, I couldn't understand why he ended his life so soon, at the age of 22. I remember at the night of his wake service, we had a few people show up telling us that my brother's death wasn't suicide, that he may have been murdered by his own best friend and his girlfriend, but they didn't want to tell the police anything, which I still didn't understand why they waited so long to even mention something like this to us. Pretty strange. He did have a girlfriend, but nothing too serious from what I remember. He also knew she wasn't really into him. She was too busy chasing other dudes around. But to this day, here's the crazy thing. My brother did have a lot of bruising to his right temple and his ear. It turned dark, showing up like he was hit by something. Nothing was ever investigated. However, after a few days, my mother's house became haunted. Weird things started happening there. After my brother passed, my mother stayed with me as she wasn't ready to move back in. Sometimes we would go over, and a lot of noises in the house could be heard. Unexplained, like glass being broken, but yet we would find nothing on the floor, and slamming doors, knocking on the windows. Sounds like somebody throwing something heavy against the walls, especially on the basement. Sometimes we could hear somebody running up and down the basement steps, or trying to open bedroom doors at night. Sometimes we would even hear what sounded like a few people whispering in the basement. talking to each other, and we would also find things in the house go missing. And then sometimes they would turn up later in a few weeks right in front of us. We would also find that some of the rosaries that my mom had around the house would be flipped face down. Or this one time we found the rosary that the arms of the cross were both broken off. We did have the house blessed twice, and nothing was changing. We did get rid of his belongings after the funeral. Well, after some time, my mom moved back in. Sometimes my kids will go spend time at her place, and they have said that they seen my brother a few times, and he looked sad, and a few times he looked very upset. After those things happened, my mom decided just to move in with me instead. I did have my place blessed a few times and had a spiritual person come by. He ended up smudging and prayed for every one of us. I will never know what exactly happened to him the night that he passed away, or even why he did it. But I know I can't spend my life wondering what happened. I have learned to accept the fact that he's gone now. But now I have to remind myself that I have children that need me more than anything. Life goes on no matter if we like it or not. This is my story that I'm sharing with you. Sorry if it's not really a scary story, but it is a true story, my own experience, and if anything, thanks for listening. Driving at night on the Rez, you'll hear stories about something chasing you. I have a story from my mom. It doesn't involve the bad medicine people known as skinwalkers, because we don't have that up here on Pine Ridge, but we do have something else. My mom told me the story one afternoon while we were driving to a border town called Hot Springs. One of her high school classmates, I will call her Yvette, had made the journey the week before. My mom was talking about her high school days when she got sort of quiet for a bit. She was looking out the window. Then she said, "This road is fine in the day, but I really don't like it at night." I did ask her how come, and she told me this while we were driving down the road. She was a boarder at the Pine Ridge School during the late 60s. She would get on the bus in Kyle on Sunday afternoon, and it would take her to school where she would stay all week and then ride it back on Friday afternoon. Like I said, this was the late 1960s, so boarding schools were a bit different than before, and she said they weren't fully forced to go, but because there wasn't any local schools around, she was sent because the government deemed it the only way towards a path to education. Anyways, she made friends at school, and she would ask my grandparents if she could spend the weekend with Yvette. They knew who Yvette's parents were, so they were fine with her spending the weekend here and there. Kyle wasn't as big as it is now, so she would take every chance to spend it with her friends. Yvette's family lived in Oglala, which was about 20 miles north of Pine Ridge. As my mom explained it, that weekend, Yvette and her decided to catch a ride with another classmate to a dance. It was going to happen in Hot Springs that Saturday night. Their friend, I will call him Dominic, picked them up around 7, so they could get there in time for the dance at 8. Back then, she said they used to have dances in Hot Springs every other weekend. They got there and were having a good time, but sometime throughout the dance, they lost track of Dominic. My mom and Yvette looked all over for him, and one of their friends named Eve told them that she thought she saw him leave. They got worried about how they were going to go back home to Oglala. Again, this was back then. It's pretty funny how I have to mention that there's no cell phones around, or anything. If you weren't around this time, you missed out. While they were looking for a house phone to call Yvette's parents for a ride, their friend Eve said that she could give them a ride back home to Oglala after the dance was done. Everybody got ready to go back home, since there was nothing else to do basically. On their way back from Hot Springs, Yvette said that she noticed a light in the sky coming towards them. She said it was a plane and soon lost interest in the light as it seemed to just be hanging in the sky. They were about 2 miles out when there was a bright flash in the sky behind them. Yvette looked behind them again and she saw that light again, but it seemed to be closer now. This happened while they were making the turn into Oglala from Highway 79 onto Highway 18, and also Eve noticed that the light seemed to be lower to the ground, and it started following them down the road. As it got closer to them, the light went closer to the ground, and suddenly, their car engine just stopped. My mom and her two friends were getting scared, wondering what was going on. All three of them started yelling and screaming, more like panicking. Eve was trying to start the car, but it wouldn't start up. They tried and tried. So after like half an hour, they left the car behind and started walking back. This way, if one of their friends drove towards the same road, they would see them much faster than having to sit there. They all assumed that some of their friends would more than likely come across them. My mom then said, I can't remember how long we were walking down the road, maybe around 15 to 20 minutes or so, and not one single vehicle had passed by. But then Yvette saw a farmhouse with a bunch of lights ahead. She said that there was a house that was off to the north of the road in the distance with the lights on. Yvette said that it was most likely a farmer or a rancher, so they chose to see if they would help them get the car started. They were kinda iffy about asking for help, but honestly, back then, at least in these times, everyone around the Rez stood together, so they chose to try their luck even though it was three young women asking for help in the middle of the night, and that itself seemed a bit strange. I mean, what could go wrong, right? The lights were on and they could hear people talking and there was music playing. My mom said as soon as they knocked on the door, the lights went off, the people quit talking, and even the music stopped. They stood there knocking and knocking for some time. Pretty soon, they got mad and started yelling at the people in the house to please open up because they needed help. They said their car had broke down and that if they won't help them, if they could at least use the phone to call someone who would come help them. There was no response, and no one came to the door. Yvette knocked one last time and they got off the porch and started walking back to the road. As they started walking back, as soon as they got like 100 yards away, the lights and the music came back. So they turned around, started walking back to the house. But as soon as they knocked, the same thing happened when they knocked on the door the first time. The voices stopped, the lights and music went off. She said they tried like 4 times to get them to open up, but everything would go quiet as soon as they knocked on the door. Then, as soon as they left, the light and the music would come back on again. You could hear voices, laughing, when they would get close to the door. So they gave up and went walking back to the car. When they got there, Eve continued trying to start the car, but it still wouldn't. By then it was 2 a.m., so they chose to sleep in the car, because there was no way they were going to walk hours back home. So they just locked the doors and went to sleep. It was just after sunrise when someone was knocking on the window. It was a guy that Eve knew. His name was Francis. He stopped to ask what happened. They told him and he helped them get the car going again. Well, not really helped, because when Eve tried to turn it on again, it actually did start up. Once the car started, my mom mentioned that Yvette was still mad about what happened, so she told Eve to drive up to the house. Yvette wanted to know why those people wouldn't help them, so when they got to the house, they all got out of the car and walked towards the front door. They could see that the house was abandoned. All of the windows were gone, the doors as well. Then, they noticed that there were no power lines to the house. My mom then mentioned that Yvette decided to look through a window, and her face went pale. She said that Yvette started walking away, and so they all just took off running back to the car and went back to Oglala as fast as they could. At this point in the story, my mom then looks at me as I'm driving, and then she says, and that's why I really don't like this road at night. She told me that she doesn't know what all this was about, but based off of other stories I read, I can't help but think that maybe, what if this light was something else? Maybe it was a spirit, maybe it was protecting them, and why did the vehicle stop? And what about the house? I know my mom wouldn't lie about this. Maybe a spirit was trying to protect them from that house by cutting their engine off, because maybe there was witchcraft going on in that house. I don't know, a lot of what ifs. But what do you all think? In 2016, my boyfriend, who's now my husband, we went camping in eastern Pennsylvania. The place we decided to stop for the night was primitive. Camping was free, no cell service. There was barely a road. We did encounter 2 other people. They might not factor into what happened later at all, but they were creepy, so I'll describe them. The first was a woman who had her truck off to the side of the road. She had the hood open and seemed to be waiting for someone to stop and offer to help. My boyfriend had no problem helping someone, but he said this time something about her put him off. She didn't really seem like she needed help, and sometimes people who need help look at you hopefully as you approach. She looked like she just expected we would stop. That's what my boyfriend said anyway. I hadn't really noticed anything that strange about her. The next person came when we had chosen a spot and were setting up a fire for hot dogs. I had noticed people drive by a few times, but my boyfriend pointed out that every time was the same car, and the man in the car was just looking at us each time he passed. My boyfriend was a little uneasy about this, but we had driven around for a while before finding a place that we liked. It was raining and everything was muddy, and we wanted the driest site possible. Maybe that guy could have been doing the same thing. We then thought about moving, but the road was muddy too. If he wanted to find us, all he had to do was follow the tracks. There were some other tracks, but not many. He would only have to backtrack a little to locate us again. He didn't come by again, so we ended up staying and spent the last few hours before dark just goofing off. No one else drove by. Whether or not those 2 had anything else to do with our experience, the real fear came later. We had gone to sleep in our tent, and sometime around 3 in the morning, we were awoken by this very loud noise. I can't describe it very well, or even remember exactly what it sounded like, but my boyfriend said it reminded him of a chain gun revving up. It was also similar to how it would sound if someone recorded a shovel being dragged over gravel, and they played it over a loudspeaker. He jumped up and looked out the little window, but he couldn't really see anything. The sound repeated again. I was too scared to speak, so my boyfriend whispered that it was most likely miles off, and that I should go back to sleep. I didn't question this, as I figured loud sounds could be easily heard miles off. After we left, he told me that it sounded like it had actually been coming from just down the road, but he didn't want to freak me out. Looking back, I should have wondered why he would whisper if apparently the sound was far off. I was still terrified. Every little thing I heard outside sounded like someone was walking around the tent. We lay there for a while longer, when finally, my boyfriend told me to get dressed because we were leaving. I got alarmed by this, and even more when he started unwrapping the machete from its plastic. It's the one that we had just bought for this trip. We quickly packed up and loaded the car. I looked around for footprints that weren't our own, but despite the moon providing plenty of light, I couldn't really see. I did point out something that my boyfriend hadn't noticed before we got into the car. There was a beer can by our dead fire. It wasn't there before, and we didn't even bring beer. While we were driving away, my boyfriend explained that he was nervous, that someone might have been trying to make us come out, so he didn't think it was a good idea to run from the tent right away. He was also expecting to find out that our gas tank had been siphoned out, but that wouldn't have stopped us because we had a hybrid car. We ended up joking that it would be a funny hybrid commercial. Number of kidnappings avoided by driving a hybrid. The rest of our trip, we only ended up staying in well-populated campsites, or we simply got a hotel. Stay safe out there. None of the names that I'm going to use here are real, but the people definitely are. When I was working on my master's, I landed a job working part-time in a paper. It was a small outlet, and I mainly applied because I enjoyed writing, and it was a pretty easy part-time job, not because I was serious about becoming any journalist. However, the boss man went ahead and saddled me with a quote big feature article covering the poorest neighborhood in the city. I didn't know how to feel about this, but my boss told me that my writing style would suit the subject matter, so I'm scheduled to meet up with this guy named Reverend Downing. His job is to explain to me the neighborhood's history, as well as introduce me to a few interesting locals. So one morning, I met up with him in his office in the neighborhood church. He actually turns out to be pretty funny. He tells me all about the neighborhood, mixing in bits of history with funny jokes. All of this happens to be great stuff for me and my article. As he starts walking, I'm taking notes when I hear a crowd gathering inside. He tells me that it's the weekly food pantry setting up inside the church. He also says that the needle ladies are showing up. I ask, who are they? He said it's a group of women who set up needle exchange on the church grounds. Drug addicts show up, tell them how many needles they use daily, and then women give them fresh needles for a week, and they take their used ones. The Reverend then says that he's going to go check up on things. In the meantime, I get up to stretch my legs. I step out of the office where a crowd of women and children are. They're all picking out some canned items that are spread out over a few different tables. Through a doorway on the far side, I can see where the Reverend is talking to the needle ladies as they're setting up the tables. I'm watching the dead-eyed druggies waiting in line when I feel a tug on my shirt. I turn around. There's a little boy looking up at me, a giant smile on his face. Hey, they have a nothing man buried outside, he says. At first I thought he said a muffin man. Excuse me, I ask. A nothing man, he repeats. I can see everything from my window. They made it inside. Then they took him outside and buried him. He points behind me and says, right there. I turn around to see Reverend Downey walking back inside. He then says in his big warm voice, come on out. I want you to meet someone very special. I turn around to say goodbye to the little kid, but he's gone. I'm introduced to Grandma Kane, who is raising 4 grandchildren all by herself. Reverend Downing gets a look on his face and tells me that the children all have AIDS. Grandma Kane and the 4 children live in a small apartment. It's in a building just down the street. I end up walking back there with them to do a small interview with her. I'm not lying when I say that the apartment building that they lived in was a shithole. It was. The elevators didn't work. Parts of the ceiling are missing. There's holes in the walls, exposing all the wiring beneath. There was no air conditioner, and it's the height of summer. So we're boiling as I'm interviewing Grandma Kane, next to an open window that is. They don't all have AIDS, she says of the children. Just 3 of them. 1 doesn't. Apparently their mom was a heroin junkie who spent most of her life in and out of jail. She basically prostituted herself out for drug money non-stop. The mom eventually went away to prison for good, and the kids ended up going with Grandma. What about the 4th child, the one that doesn't have AIDS? That's the oldest, Grandma King tells me. She claims that Martha was not born with AIDS, and that she has been tested, which is extremely rare. She also claims that Martha was raped when she was 9 years old, but that event traumatized her. Overnight, it was like a switch flipped in the girl's head. Martha started spending all her time running around the neighborhood with drug dealers and criminals. She's only 13, and she has had 2 abortions already. I asked Grandma King what happened to the person who raped Martha, but she refuses to tell me. I'm kind of surprised because she's been so forthcoming up until this point. I assume that she's afraid of someone. Was it one of the drug dealers? I ask. No, she says. So was it somebody around in the neighborhood? No, it wasn't one of them. She seems to be getting more and more nervous as I ask her about it. Then she says something that leaves me confused. Everyone knows about the criminals and the drug dealers, but nobody knows the truth about the ghetto. So what is the truth? I asked her. She seems exasperated now and finally says, there's worse things out there than drug dealers. Things? What things? She looks me dead in the eye and makes a motion like she's sipping her lips closed. My curiosity has overtaken me by this point, so I tell her that we can do things off the record, which is something that I always wanted to say during the interview. If she wants to, then we can do it. So I turn it off. She's fidgeting now, staring out the window. Before she seemed nervous, but now she's scared. I then say, is somebody telling you to stay quiet? I can help you. She shakes her head. I ask, "Who are you afraid of?" And then she snaps, "It's not a who." Instantly, her body relaxes, and her eyes seem to glaze over. She turns and looks out the window. At first I assume that she's ignoring me, but then I notice that she's not breathing. Her chest isn't moving. I'll cut to the chase and say that she basically died right there. The grandkids were screaming and crying. I call 911. Nobody shows up for an hour, and I call again. The dispatcher says that the police will be right over, and they are. 2 squad cars though, no ambulance, and then it hits me. No one's even coming to remove Grandma Kane's body. After talking with the cops where I explained what happened, and that I was interviewing her, and then she passed away, they tell me to leave the premises immediately, and they assure me that somebody will deal with the body. Then they put the kids in the back of the car. I ask, where are the kids going to be taken to? One of the officers says, most likely the prison. They have a child care facility there. And he wasn't joking. By this point it's almost dark and I need to get home. I make the walk back to my car, and I'm passing the church courtyard when I hear a familiar voice. "Do you want to see where they put it?" I turn around and it's the same kid from earlier. That big goofy smile on his face and all. After all that I just went through, his silly grin kinda catches me off guard, and I find myself chuckling a bit. "They put something on top of the nothing man's grave," he tells me. "You can still see it poking out though." He points towards the churchyard. Don't ask me why, but I walk over and begin to inspect the yard. I know that the kid is most likely just telling stories, but I guess I'm still on autopilot, still processing the events of that afternoon. Then, I find a round patch of dirt that looks like it's been recently dug up, and in the center is something that kind of sparkles in the low moonlight. I reach for it, then I pull my hand back, squeezed into a little grove in the dirt, right in the center of the freshly dug dirt. It's a human eye, staring straight up at me. I almost gag and I step back. Then I hear a familiar voice. "Did you find something?" It's Reverend Downing. He leans in the doorway of the church, almost completely hidden by the shadows. For a moment I'm confused. Then I point down on my feet. "Have you seen this?" He doesn't respond. He just says, "I kept an eye out on your car for you." Before I can respond, "You gotta keep an eye on things around here," he said, "or they disappear." At this point he's not even smiling, and even his voice starts to sound different. "Things always go missing around here," he tells me. "Cars, people, and the police isn't even gonna bother to investigate." I get myself collected and I ask, "Is there somebody here?" Reverend Downing steps out of the shadows and says, "I did hear about Grandma Kane." There's this weird expression on his face. It finally dawns on me that he's basically saying all this as a threat. If I wasn't a reverend, I bet you'll never find what killed her. He said this and then paused for a second, and I'm sure I would win that bet. "Who the hell is here?" I ask. "It's not a who, it's a what," he says, and then begin to feel severely nauseous and dizzy. "And you're gonna find out just what that is if you don't step back." He reaches for my hand, grabs it, and yanks me back from the ring of recently dug dirt. And just like that I feel better. I then notice that the Reverend is sweating. His hand is on his chest, his finger searching for his crucifix. He tells me to get on home now. And as I walk away, I hear a strange sound, a weird humming sound that seems to be coming from beneath the ground. I didn't even think twice. I scramble to my vehicle. I start the engine and leave, away from the church and out of this neighborhood. As I'm driving, I pass by Grandma Kane's apartment building. I glance up at her small window, and I can still see her body sitting up in the chair. I'm not sure if it was just my imagination, or the shadows, or the fear, but it also looked like she was missing an eye. Needless to say, these events shook me to my core. I wasn't sure what I was supposed to do about the article. In the end, I ended up taking the easy way and wrote a feature piece like I was told to, focusing on the emotional struggles of living in a ghetto, ignoring all the true disturbing things that I had seen. I spoke to a leader and some recovering addicts to build my peace, but I steered clear of the church and the reverend. I couldn't help but bring up something to the person that I was interviewing. He was running for something in that town. Can't exactly remember what. He was very knowledgeable of the neighborhood, and I also ended up asking him if he ever heard of something called the Nothing Man. His reaction left me wondering. There was a flash of recognition in his eyes, but he insisted. I only know it by that name. He said it was an old urban folk tale. It was known in the neighborhood before he was even born, and that it was now basically forgotten. It's one of those things you heard kids talking about during the Depression, a scary story to scare each other. I know something's going on there. And beyond that, I have no fucking idea who or what the Nothing Man is. My grandma told me that there was a woman that was known as a witch on our res back in the early 1900s. She said that when she died, they had her wake in a shed-like house that had no power. They had candles burning at night to light it. My grandfather said that they were all sitting at the table when all the candles blew out, and they heard some creepy whispering. They ended up lighting another candle, and when they looked, he said that the woman was standing straight up out of her casket, her mouth wide open, with blood pouring out. They all got scared and ran outside, and nobody went in there until the sun came up, and she was back in her casket again. I swear, our grandparents saw so much creepy shit that we most likely wouldn't believe it ourselves. I have even looked into different explanations of this, but that's just me though, just because my mind likes to operate off of logic. But still, it doesn't make sense how it happened. I know back in those days they most likely didn't embalm the bodies, and so I heard from friends who told me that sometimes dead bodies sit up, something about air bubbles inside their bodies, or something like that. Still, to stand up completely. I heard of them moving, but like only their hands or arms moving, and sometimes making small sounds, but I still never heard of them standing, then to lay back down. Well, my grandparents explained that there was an evil spirit who animated her body. After all, she was a witch, so it's not uncommon for evil forces to possess someone's body, even after death, even if it's just for a little bit of time. After all, she did bargain her soul to begin with. Well, that story was just to explain how there's witchcraft all over the res. But this story that I'm going to share with you, my mom told me when I was a kid. My mom made the journey home back in December of 2014. I know she's gone. I just don't want to admit it yet. It makes for some restless nights ever since she went home. During these seasons of remembering her, these moments, I also remember stories that she told me. She tells me strange stories of things that happen here on the res. I'm trying to remember all the stories that she told me throughout the years, and I also write them down. Not just scary stories, but life lessons and stories of her growing up. So if you still have your mom, hug her, be with her. Even if she's told you the same stories plenty of times before, there's nothing like seeing that look on her face as she is excited, passionate about sharing all these things with you. This one story always stuck in my head whenever she told me. I would even remember it for days, even for a few weeks after. She would always tell me that she wanted to tell me something, so I would listen as she told her story. My mom was soft-spoken whenever she told these stories, so my natural impulse was to listen carefully. As I'm sitting here writing this, I realized that she did this so I would listen real careful to her story. So this began somewhere in the late 1930s, when she was a young girl. She was around 7 or 8 whenever this happened. She would start the story about her mom and dad telling her and her brothers to get ready, because they were going to go visit her grandparents in non-native family relationships. That would be her great uncle and great auntie. I could never wrap my mind around that concept, so when she said it was her grandma and grandpa, I just accepted it. My mom lived in an area called American Horse Creek, and it happened to be south of Kyle, South Dakota, about 6 or 7 miles away. Her grandparents lived south of Wounded Knee, down in the valley. She told me the name of it, but I can't remember what she called it. But she said it's somewhere near Fast Horse Creek. In present time, it's somewhere south and west of the Tan Water Tower, that is south of Wounded Knee. A visit to her grandparents involved a few days of travel by horse and wagon, as Wounded Knee is about 28 miles in a straight line. Horse and wagon isn't the fastest way to travel, but back in the 1930s, that's how many people traveled. It was a trip that was always fun for my mom and her brothers, to go visit her grandma and grandpa. It was sometime during the summer when they went to go visit. It took a few days to get there, and when they did, it was like home away from home. They always had a good time. Her grandparents lived in a one-room cabin that her grandpa had constructed out of pine trees. Like most cabins that were built back then, it had one door and two windows on opposite ends of the cabin. The sunshine came through the window that was facing east, and as the sun set, it would shine through the window on the west. Her bed was along the wall facing the north and was beside the window to the west. The wood stove and kitchen area was on the east side of the cabin. On this year's visit, it was different, and her grandparents told her mom and dad to keep the kids close to the cabin, and once the sun had set, that no one was allowed to go outside, especially her and her brothers. This visit was not as fun as other visits, and they didn't like staying inside at night, so my mom asked Grandma why they had to stay in the cabin at night. Grandma told her that they had to stay inside because there was bad medicine walking around. She didn't understand what her grandma had meant, so she asked her mom what Grandma was talking about. That night when everyone was inside, her mom asked Grandma what she was talking about. So with the lamp flickering, Grandma told the following story. Now, I know I'm telling a story within a story, but bear with me, it will make sense. Grandma said that a month earlier, they were doing their normal things for the summer, working on their garden, doing whatever needed to be done. Off to the west, they could see clouds were building over the Black Hills. They knew a thunderstorm was on its way. They knew it would be there in the early evening. And they were correct. The thunderstorm arrived. If any of you are from South Dakota, then you know the kind of thunderstorm I'm talking about. The one that comes during the summer. High winds, lots of brief heavy rain that slowly turns into a soft rain. And throughout the storm, you have lots of lightning as well. At the same time, it's a beautiful sight. So she said they got ready for bed, closed the door for the night as the storm rolled in. They didn't close the curtains, so the cabin was lit every now and then by lightning as the storm came through. The light came through both the west and east windows as the lightning flashed. They fell asleep to the sound of rain and thunder. Sometime during the late stages of the storm, my grandma woke up. She had a strange feeling, so she started to look around in the dark. The lightning came again as she was looking around, but it was only visible from the west window. She looked to the east window, and she stared hard into the darkness. She was trying to remember if she had closed the curtain on the east window, simply because there was no light coming through. The next lightning flash lit up the east window this time. She sat up in bed and looked again. The next lightning showed a clear view. She lay back down, but she still couldn't shake the feeling. The lightning flashed again, and this time the window was blocked. She ended up staring towards the window and waited for the next flash. But the next lightning flash revealed a tall, skinny silhouette. It had a wrong shape. It was crouching down in front of the window. It was not just tall. It seemed long and twisted. There was hair hanging down over its face. And when the lightning flashed again, she could see eyes looking in, almost like it was scanning the room. Her grandma reached over and woke up Grandpa. He asked her what she wanted. All she did was whisper to him to look towards the window by the kitchen. He said that he couldn't see anything. When the next flash of lightning happened, he looked towards the window. He sat up in bed really fast, but that's when Grandma told him to lay back down. When he did, that's when he saw it. the shape stooping down, its face, or whatever was pressing onto the glass. They both laid there in bed. Then the next lightning flash lit up the east window, and this time they saw somebody's head stooping over to peek into the window. They lay there in bed and waited for the next lightning flash. The head and shoulders had stooped over enough for them to see its face. Staring into the cabin, they could see its eyes. They were getting scared when the lightning happened again. This time, the waist was above the top of the window. With the next flash of lightning, they looked again, except this time, there was nothing in front of the window. They ended up staying awake until the sun rose. Grandma told my mom that it was most likely a witch practicing bad medicine, one who had to give up their humanity and use dark medicine to change. My mom then finished the story by warning me. She said to never go outside after sunset when the storms are near, and to never look too long into the darkness. This is my story. I hope you all enjoyed it as much as I loved hearing my mom tell it. So a little background to start. I work as a tracker for a local group in Colorado. My job consists of surveying areas and mapping out common game trails, and also places for herds to gather for hunting and ecological purposes. When I'm out, I'm mostly on an ATV until I find a game trail, which then I'll map it out on foot. When I'm going long distances, I stop at these outposts that have been set up along the trail to refuel and rest for the night, or to go into them in case of some crazy weather. I've seen some things that have made me question what's out there, such as deer that's been mutilated, even some elk that's been torn in half, holes dug through the fresh bodies of animals from the inside out. While seeing these things is very creepy, I just shrug them off as some kind of nasty parasite or a freakish bear attack. The situation that made me wonder whether or not I was up against something much bigger didn't happen until recently. It was when I was near the border of Colorado and Wyoming, in between outposts on the first week of December. To start, it was snowing lightly. The pine stopped most of the snow from falling on me while I was walking back to my ATV. The layer on the ground was at least a foot deep off trail, making it pretty difficult to move or be quiet while lumbering through it. I got on the ATV and I drove it half a mile up the trail, almost crossing over into Wyoming when I noticed another trail that looked freshly made. When I got off the ATV, I noticed some small droplets of blood in the snow going down the trail with what looked like bear prints, with something else dragging behind it. I grabbed my gun off the back of my ATV and I slung it over my shoulder. The trail looked fresh, almost new, but the prints and the blood were starting to get covered by a thin layer of snowfall. While walking along the trail, I noticed something kind of weird. In the middle of the bear tracks, it looked like a human foot, but it was weird, elongated, and thin with only 4 toes on the end. These tracks twisted within the bear prints themselves, almost like the animal's foot spun around coming out of the bear track. I just continued, glancing into the track, and sure enough, the prints were still there. When I got to the end of this clearing, I stopped following the bear tracks. Something about this clearing, with some sort of unknown animal, was making me very uneasy. I mapped it out and placed a red line over it, indicating a high predatory area. On the way back, I noticed something strange about my own footprints. Now, I'm a big guy, standing at 6'2", with a size 13, but whatever had made the tracks had a footprint that was larger than my own. But that's not the worst part. Whatever it was, it had followed my footprints back, heading the same direction I was. Whatever it was had snuck behind me, and was now heading towards my ATV. I shouldered my rifle, and I put a round in the chamber, and as I was walking back I was glancing down every so often to see if the footprints were still indeed mine. When I got back to my ATV, I noticed that the footprints circled my vehicle and stopped behind it, and then it shuffled a bit. Then I noticed that my jerry can was missing, and that thing had left a trail of gasoline down the road from where I came. I hopped onto my quad to get going to the opposite direction, hoping to distance myself from whatever it was that stole my fuel. After crossing over into Wyoming, I noticed that everything was rather still. It was still snowing, but even the flakes almost seemed to be suspended in midair, not falling, but not static either. And I couldn't hear anything when my ATV was off. No animals, no snowfall, not even my own breathing. It was almost like something had hit the mute button and stopped all sound from existing. After looking around, I found another game trail, this time a few hundred yards off the main trail. So I got off and I walked towards the opening in the trees, with snow still covering the rocky terrain around me. All along the trail, I would catch fleeting glimpses of a shadow, just one. It was moving along the trail with me. I put it off to a lack of sleep making me see things. But on my way back, I got a chill up my spine, and my own footprints were the same tracks that I saw at the last trail, the same twisty, human-like prints, but this time, something was touching the ground in front of them, like a swipe here and there, almost like whatever it was tracking me by my scent. That's when I saw a movement in the corner of my eye. I reached for my sidearm, kicking myself for leaving the rifle on the ATV. I then heard a ragged breath from my left, almost like if you collapsed the lung on a deer. Fuck it, I drew and fired into the trees, striking an aspen and blowing a hole through its small frame. No movement, no snowfall, and no animal. I then started getting the same feeling that I was getting from the clearing, and so I just ran back to my quad. Whatever was following me had already beat me there. I followed the tracks around my ATV like last time, and I stopped to see what it took next. A large rifle that would require something very big to carry it off in its mouth, or something with hands and the strength to carry it. I looked a little bit closer at the prints and found something that I had missed the previous times. Inside the footprints, right where the twist ended, I noticed 4 very long appendages peeking through the twisted snow. It looked like a monkey foot, but longer and more hand-like, not even enough to be a human. I mounted and hit the throttle, spinning out a bit until I gained traction. I was too low on fuel to go back to a main road where I could get help, so I was forced to go to my next outpost. When I got there, the small cabin, hut-like structure looked so comforting and protective that I almost cried. It had fuel for the quad, a safe place for me to sleep. The sun was setting, and I was firing up the stove after starting the generator, when my radio crackled and came to life. I jumped when I heard the static. I ran over to the radio and requested an evac or an extra team for a safe escort. When they asked why, I lied to them, and I told them that I was being hunted by a bear, and that I lost my rifle on the trail. The voice on the other end said that my team would be there by morning. When I hung up the radio and started to get comfy and safe, I heard a thump at my door. I froze in my bed, not knowing what to do. I finally got up after debating whether I should just hide. I'm not a coward, I thought. I grabbed my sidearm and I walked towards the door. I peeked out the small window to see if someone or something was out there, but all I saw was darkness. Stupid. I opened the door and shouted, "If you don't leave, I'm gonna kill you. You took one of my guns, but I still have the other." There was no response, so I looked at my door to see what hit it, and I only saw the remains of a snowball. Just a snowball. I waited to see if I could see any movement, but that's when another snowball came flying out of the darkness to my left side, and it hit my shoulder. "You better fucking run or I'm gonna kill you," I yelled out. I slammed the door and ran out to confront whatever threw the snowball. I ran towards where the snowball came from, watching for any prints or signs. That's when I saw something in the darkness. It looked like a man had fallen and was scrambling on the ground to get up, making that same raspy breathing noise. I stopped and aimed, but saw that whatever it was in front of me continued to run on all fours at a fast speed, faster than I could run. I froze in place when I saw the black silhouette dart off into the darkness, not even sure what to do. After listening and hearing nothing, no breathing, no running, no sounds, I went back to my cabin. When I got into the clearing that my hut was in, I stopped, took a breath, relieved that I had made it out of the woods alive. I calmed myself down, and I started walking towards my cabin, illuminated by the porch light on the deck. I looked down, trying to follow my own tracks back to conserve energy. I almost vomit. The twisted footprints were in my tracks heading towards the cabin. Each twisted footprint slamming down into my own until it got to my porch. Through all the snow was my rifle and my jerry can, placed neatly on the porch, leaning against the wall. The door was cracked open a bit. I swear, I saw the leg of that thing inside as soon as I looked at it. I wish that I could say that I went in there and I shot the thing dead, but I was too frozen with fear to do anything but stand there. I wish I could say that I was brave and fought the good fight, but I didn't. I fell on my knees onto the ground. I spent 6 hours out there in the darkness, waiting for whatever that thing was to come out and finish me, but it never did. My crew found me covered in snow, with my gun drawn and pointed at my cabin. They questioned me and searched the entire cabin. All of my food was taken. Everything was thrown everywhere. The place was a mess. And the radio, it was destroyed beyond repair. And there was no sign of whatever it was that was hunting me that night. This is said to have happened a long time ago, maybe back in the 20s or 30s. This story is about a Navajo man who was working as a ranch hand for a rich Navajo who had a lot of horses and cattle and sheep all around the western part of the Navajo Rez in Tuba City, Arizona. One day, he decided to go home to see what his relatives were doing, somewhere past Shiprock, New Mexico. So he talked to his supervisor and asked to take leave, and he was going to go home to see his family. So he packed a good horse and started off his long journey home early in the morning, cross country through canyons, mesas, and open country. Somewhere along the way he stopped for a rest stop, and while he was resting, he spotted an old mangy coyote sitting on top of a hill not too far away. He took out his rifle, aimed, and fired. The coyote slumped over and didn't move again, so he climbs up to see his kill, and there, laying before him, he couldn't believe his eyes. The dead body was that of a young Navajo man with long hair. His body was half human, and bottom half animal. The upper part of the body was painted with designs, and his lower half was coyote. He had shot a yenagloshi. It must have been resting like he was when he shot it. He got scared and didn't know what to do with it. He walked around and he saw a deep crevice along the edge. So he dragged its body and threw it down, only hearing its body hit somewhere deep down in the dark crevice. As scared as he was, he decided he needed to distance himself away from it, across Chinle Valley and over the Big Chuska Mountains. He rode all day and into the night, pushing his horse to the limit. He was finally able to make it across the Chuska Mountains and past Shiprock to a relative's home where he told him what happened. They told him to never go back to his employer and to stay there because the relatives of the Skinwalker would sure be looking for answers and be out looking for him. Several months passed, and one day he felt safe enough to come out of hiding, and there was a ceremony happening somewhere around Shiprock. He decided to attend. When he got to the ceremony, there were many people in attendance, camping, and with their wagons parked here and there. And just as he was beginning to enjoy the ceremony, there was an old Navajo man walking around among the people, talking out loud. The old man was saying they were looking for a son who had gone missing a couple of months ago. The old man was telling everybody about his son's journey and where his son had last stopped and where he was last seen. He said he had gone missing after his last known location and never showed up at the next stop. The old man was describing exactly the young Navajo and the area of the rest where he had shot it. Next, the old man says, And there is one man that knows what happened to our son, and he is here among you today. We are camped over there, and we would like for you to come over to our camp and tell us what you know about what happened to our son." The guy knew the old Navajo man was talking about him, and somehow knew he was in attendance at the ceremony. He said he left the ceremony as quickly and quietly as possible, and he stayed hiding for many years at his home. He said he never went back to work for his employer over on the western part of the Navajo Rez, and he stayed home. After many years later, he finally came out of hiding, and he told his story to only a few people that he trusted. He said he never went back to the western part of the Navajo Rez. You may ask, how did the people find out this was the man? Well, when the old man announced his search for his missing son at the ceremony, it wasn't a coincidence. You see, Navajo ceremonies serve as channels through which communication with the spirit world is done. I won't go too much into detail, but there are ceremonies where prayers are offered, tobacco, invoking the assistance of spirits for guidance and clarity. Through this process, secrets, revelations can surface, shedding light on mysteries and revealing the truth that's hidden beneath the surface. There's also the communication with elders, as their experience and connection to the Navajo traditions and medicine provide valuable guidance. You see, they have the knowledge passed down through generations, enabling them to decipher the signs and messages from the spiritual side of things with wisdom and discernment. Let the story be a reminder of digging into things that are beyond our understanding and the weight of the choices we make. Within the Navajo tradition, encountering a skinwalker can possibly bring a curse onto your life. So let this be a reminder to be careful, respect the cultural beliefs, and be mindful of the unseen that exists in the world around us. I was always a solitary kid growing up. I grew up on the outskirts of my little town that I grew up in and never really had any friends. I would hang out with someone here and there, but for the most part, I stuck to myself. Even in high school, I found time to invest in hobbies such as fishing, hunting, and playing cards. I used to always love a game of spades with my parents and little brother. Even though I loved all the hobbies that I did, hunting was my favorite. I would go hunting on all sorts of critters when it was in season, and I would spend hours just to hunt something. You see, the fun part of it wasn't the fact that I just killed something. It was the fact that I had outsmarted the animal. I now had a trophy to signify my victory. Nothing would come close to the feeling that I would get when I came home with a fresh kill under my belt. I would spend days out in the wilderness to hunt, and I would get lost out there with nature, with nothing but the sounds of the other creatures that filled the woods in which I was choosing to steal life away from. Due to my love for hunting and fishing, I never found time to do schoolwork. I passed all my classes with at least a C, and I graduated high school, but further education was not something destined for me. I was convinced hunting was my calling. After high school, I began to go hunting, not just for pleasure, but for work as well. There was a company close by to my hometown that made deer jerky, and was looking for hunters that could get the meat. Of course, me, the self-proclaimed lover of such activities, applied for this position, and after a week of waiting, I got the job. I was to begin as of right then and there, so I grabbed my gear and went out to the woods and set up shop in the tree stand. The same tree stand that I had been using for as long as I can remember, and I began to wait. I must have sat in that stand for hours, because soon the sun was beginning to set. It was summer though, So I knew I had some time before I was shrouded in darkness. And that's when I saw him. There was a male buck. It got into view all the way on the horizon. I sat there watching it, mesmerized by how it was moving. It calmly paced the forest floor, bending over here and there to eat some grass or berries, until finally it came to the creek that I had set my stand up near to. It stood for a moment. It looked around and dropped its head to take a much needed sip of water. This was it, the moment that I had been waiting for. I raised my rifle, knowing I had only one shot, and I aimed at it directly behind his front shoulder. I took a deep breath. My shot was perfect. It traveled directly through the buck's heart, and it killed him on the spot. My heart swelled as again I knew I won. All this waiting was not in vain. I nearly flew down the steps to my stand and rushed over to the buck. His eyes were still open. I was glad it was instant though, so that he wouldn't have to suffer. I picked him up and soon I was back home. I called the company and soon they had someone come over to my house and pick up the latest kill. I thanked the man as he left and shut my door, feeling more proud than ever. I knew that this is what I was going to do for the rest of my life, or so I thought. A few years passed and I continued doing what I loved, and eventually I received enough money from hunting that I moved away from my hometown and moved to West Virginia, as I heard that the hunting there was great. I wanted to live out in the backcountry, as I wanted to go hunting all the time, and I found a place where I could do just that. There was an old cabin, not too expensive, and it sat right there in the forest, not too far away from a town, maybe a 15 or 20-minute drive, so not completely isolated. I liked it, and I made a couple of friends in town as well. Most of them like hunting, but only one ever wanted to come with me to go. His name is Brian. Brian's a good guy, so we got along well, and we gone hunting a few times. The only difference between us is that he's got a full family, wife, the kids, even has a golden retriever. He's a lucky guy, I'll tell you that. He's a good shot too, and I'm glad he's my hunting partner. I had set up my tree stand maybe a week after buying the cabin out in the forest, and maybe a month after that is when Brian and I first went hunting together. We sat up in that stand for hours, waiting for something to turn up. Eventually, a doe did show up, and we did our thing and carried her back to my cabin. At this point, I had already learned enough about the making of jerky to know how to do it myself, and with the help of Brian, we skinned the doe, and we began making jerky and steaks. We would go hunting maybe once or twice every 2 weeks, but I would go hunting almost every night. At this point, I had found another company somewhat close by, maybe an hour away, that again needed hunters to gather meat. So once again I applied and got the job. Everything seemed to be going well. I was good at my job and it also paid well. Almost every night, I was always up in the tree stand for so long, so I knew just about every sound in the woods, from the elk to mountain lion screams, all the way to foxes and coyotes. You give me a noise out in the woods and I could tell you exactly what animal it is, and sometimes even tell you the gender of it. That's what made this night so different. Like always, I was up in my stand, and that's when I heard it, a scream. I played it off like it was nothing, because it was most likely nothing. Except this time, the scream was different. It sounded similar to something I heard before, but I couldn't put my finger on it. Brian was with me and he also couldn't figure it out. Most of the time we don't really care about these noises, as it's not exactly our business to worry about every little sound we hear in the woods at night. However, this noise was just wrong. Something was not right with this scream. Something was not right about it. And after a good 10 minutes of sitting through it and thinking through every animal it could be, Brian and I decided that we would go check it out. After all, we were both armed and had good shots, and if it was a mountain lion, we figured it would run away as soon as it heard us coming. We got down from the stand and began our walk towards the direction of the scream. After a minute or two, we could tell we were getting closer because the noise was just getting louder. It seemed to echo throughout the trees, and I'm not gonna lie when I say it freaked us both out a little bit. However, we continued on, and after another minute of hiking, we stumbled upon a clearing where we saw where the noise was coming from. It was a huge elk, standing in the middle of the clearing, just screaming out into the night. We looked at each other, and through the look on Brian's face, I could tell he still shared the same uneasiness that I was feeling. We turned to look at the huge elk, still screaming, and deciding to let it be. We walked all the way back to the stand. After some back and forth, we decided it would be in our best interest to call it a night and just go home. When we hunted at night, Brian usually stayed in the guest room in my cabin, as it was always late when we got done, around 2 or 3 in the morning, and he didn't want to wake up his children or his wife when he got home, so he would crash at my place. However, even though we were far away now from the elk, it seemed like it was following us, because the screams were just as loud as ever. This did kind of freak us both out, but we figured if we went to sleep, it would all be over in the morning, so we did. However, it wasn't the ending. When we woke up, the scream had disappeared. Brian said goodbye, and he left for his home. I did the same routine. I went into town and waited until dusk before going back out into the woods and into my stand. I was still a bit unnerved from last night, but I figured this would help me get my mind off of it, and it did. That was until midnight, when I heard the scream again. This time, however, the scream really sounded wrong. Like, really wrong. I could tell this was not the same scream from last night, but again, I couldn't tell what type of animal it was. I hoped and prayed that it would go away, but it didn't. The screaming continued on and on until I couldn't take it anymore. I had to find out what the hell was screaming in the dead of night. I set out in the same direction as last night, expecting for the worst to be awaiting me. I continued through the underbrush until finally I reached the clearing from the night prior. What I saw this time shook me to my core. There was no elk, like I had expected. Instead, there was a figure standing in the middle of the clearing, facing away from me. I froze, unable to comprehend what I was witnessing. This thing was massive, at least 8 feet tall, and I couldn't tell if it was human or something else. I'll admit it, I was fucking terrified. I had never seen something like this before, and I was ready to book it away from there. I didn't want whatever this thing was to see me though, so I backpedaled as slow as I could, staring at this thing for as long as it was in view. As soon as it was just on the horizon, it stopped screaming. I froze and thought, why did it stop? I wondered. I stood there in the trees, dumbfounded, staring at this fucking 8-foot tall creature that had just been screaming in the middle of the woods. I realized now what a fatal mistake I had made by not running home as soon as I saw this thing. As I was standing there, it turned around, and my body was struck with fear. Even though I was at least 300 yards away from this thing, I know it was staring directly at me, and it knew that I was there. Its yellow eyes were piercing into my heart. As it got down on all fours and began screaming once again, it started galloping towards me. I stood there frozen for another moment before booking it. I knew all the shortcuts to my house, and I took every single one of them. Knowing that I didn't have much time left, I started sprinting faster than I ever had, hearing its echoing cries in the distance. Its growing intensity only proving I was going too slow. As the sound grew louder than ever, I saw my house. I fumbled with my keys to get to the one that opened my front door, and as I reached the porch, I found it. I unlocked the door and shut it as soon as I got there. The cries, the screaming, whatever the fuck it was screaming right outside. And I knew whatever this thing was, it was at my front door, walking around, searching for what I'd assume a way to get inside. Terrified, I hid in my freezer, where I hoped the smell of meat and ice would help mask my scent to the steam. After a few minutes, I heard the sound of glass breaking. Then, the sound of footsteps. This thing had found its way inside my house, and I could hear it moving around upstairs, tracking any signs of me I know. I did try texting Brian to get over to my place, but my messages didn't go through. And given that it's 3 in the morning, I doubt he was gonna see them anyways. After about 30 minutes of not hearing this thing anymore, I got out, freezing, but I feel like my body was ignoring all that because I was too focused on trying to figure out if this thing had left. I sat there in the basement all night, aiming directly at the door, waiting to see if this thing showed up. It never did. I eventually fell asleep on the floor. The morning came. I woke up, and I noticed that the door to the basement was open. My heart fucking dropped. But I'm still here. So what happened? I'm not sure. But I will tell you what happened the days after. I ended up moving and selling that fucking house. As much as I love the outdoors. Ever since that experience, I fucking moved out and never went back to living in the woods again. Everything happened so fast. I told Brian. I know he probably didn't believe me, but I didn't care. I moved out. I moved to a whole other fucking city, and I will never go into some woods again. A few days ago, I packed up my car and made my way to an Airbnb that I actually rented a few miles outside of Andrews, North Carolina. I live and work just north of ATL, and just felt like being in the city was draining what little bit of sanity that I had left. Most of my team, including myself, had switched to working remotely from home due to COVID, and since I live alone, I was starting to feel the mental toll of staring at the same 4 walls of my cramped 1-bedroom apartment, day in and day out. A lot of people were struggling with the transitions to working from home, so the overall production went down, and the workload seemed to be piling up, more than we could keep up with. Project after project, they kept getting dumped into my lap, and since we're all cooped up inside all the time at home, I didn't feel like I could escape the crushing weight of all this added stress. One day, I felt that I had reached my breaking point. I submitted a time off notice to my supervisor. I booked an Airbnb and decided I would spend a couple of weeks near the national forest. I figured if I was going to be isolated, I could at least use a change of scenery. I had always enjoyed hiking and camping as a kid. In fact, moving to the big city for my job had always felt a little bit out of character for me. I was excited to reconnect with nature and enjoy everything that the park had to offer. I figured that because of all the lockdown restrictions, foot traffic on the hiking trails would be minimal, so I would basically have most of the woods to myself. The weather was supposed to be nice and cool for most of my visit, without being unbearably cold. Perfect for wandering around in the forest, fishing, bird watching, or whatever else I felt like doing. I left around sunrise and arrived at my rental shortly before noon. The cabin was well sized, and it was rustic but appeared to be well maintained. I retrieved the key from the lockbox near the front door, and I made my way inside to get settled. The cabin was quite a bit larger than my 1-bedroom apartment in the city, but somehow it felt much more welcoming. I walked into the bedroom and took in the breathtaking view from out of the panoramic window that covered the back wall. Miles of forest for as far as the eye could see, gently fading into shades of green and gray, underneath the trees that only allowed scattered beams of sunlight to peek through. I thought about laying down on the bed with one of the books that I had brought along with me, but I decided against it, given that the day was still young and I was excited to go exploring. I had gotten rather lucky in finding this cabin rental. Not only was it secluded within the national forest, but one of the features that was on the website was that there was a private hiking trail that started right off to the side of the cabin itself. Several of the reviews that I read before booking said that the trail was scenic and captivating. A few miles in, the private trail would eventually dump out into one of the public hiking routes, but according to the reviews, no one had ever had a stranger come into the private trail and end up near the cabin. I laced up my hiking boots and headed out into the trail. Beautiful trees reaching high into the sky were towering over me, gently tossing in the wind and rustling their leaves. I found myself staring at them as I walked further and further into the forest, barely able to take my eyes off of them to watch where I was going. That's until something, tall and dark, caught my attention deep within the trees off the path. I squinted to try to make out the large object, but I couldn't discern what it was from where I was standing. Against my better judgment, I turned off the trail and started walking towards it. Curiosity had gotten the better of me, and I knew I wouldn't be able to sleep that night unless I quenched my thirst for adventure. As I got closer, I found myself puzzled as I realized what I was looking at. A dark, colored, metal staircase leading to nowhere. I walked around the base of it to see if I could figure out what had become of the rest of the building. To my surprise, there was no evidence of any building ever being connected to this set of stairs. I chuckled to myself about what I just found, reaching for my back pocket to get my phone for some photographic evidence. I quickly realized that in my excitement to get out into the trails, I left my phone behind in the cabin. I figured it wasn't the best idea to be out here without a phone, so I turned back and found my way back into the trail to head back to the cabin. I hadn't realized how much the hike took out of me, so I took a shower and decided to spend the rest of the night just relaxing. The next morning, I woke up feeling energized, but I couldn't get the thought of that bizarre staircase out of the back of my mind. After making myself something to munch on, I laced up my boots once again, double checking to make sure that I had my cell phone this time, and I set out to get some pictures of my recent discovery so that I could convince myself that I hadn't just imagined the whole thing. After walking for quite a while, I started to feel defeated, unable to locate where I had found the staircase. As I began toying with the idea of heading back to the cabin to make myself something for lunch, a strange noise caught my attention from up ahead in the trees. I began to walk towards the direction of the sound, and soon enough, what had originally started off as a low humming noise had evolved into the rumbling tones of tribal horns being played in unison throughout the forest. The sound was growing loud. As I continued towards the source, a creeping feeling of dread began to pull in the pit of my stomach. I felt like I had been drawn into a state of hypnosis by the sound of the horns. I snapped back into reality, and there in front of me, the staircase. Somehow, I had made my way back to the foot of the mysterious staircase. At this point, the horns were sounding so loud that I felt as if I was being guided by a force beyond my own control. And I kid you not, I felt myself placing my foot on the first step of the staircase, slowly beginning to ascend against my own free will. I reached the top, feeling a cold sweat break out across my entire body, my heart pounding, but it felt as though I could not will my body to turn and leave. A deep sense of dread coursed through my veins, churning my stomach and making me feel weak as I was staring into the forest from the top of the stairs. And that's when I noticed the edges of my vision beginning to darken and fade. Only moments before I lost consciousness, I got a glimpse of a tall, dark looming figure standing in the trees, watching me from afar. Seconds later, I felt my legs begin to fold beneath me, and the sound of the horns faded to a peaceful silence. When I woke up, I was lying in my bed back at the cabin. Panicked, I reached for my phone in my pocket, checking the time, nearly midnight. My first thought was that I had actually come back from my hike early and had taken a nap, possibly having a nightmare in the process. My memory seemed hazy, and I was struggling to remember all the details. I dismissed my fear as being a part of my overactive imagination, and the stress from my job working its way out of my system. I let out a sigh of relief and began to calm down. That's until I noticed I was still wearing my hiking shoes. I have been exhausted many times in my life, but never to the point that I would have worn my muddy hiking shoes to bed. A sudden and lingering feeling of being watched rushed over me as I remembered that the large panoramic window to my right remained fully uncovered and open to the inky black forest surrounding the cabin. My hands began to shake as I summoned my willpower to turn and face the darkness, assuring myself that there would be nothing there. To my despair, what I saw outside of that window against the backdrop of swirling darkness and moonlight was a tall, black figure, the head resembling the eyeless skull of a deer. Several sets of bony antlers twisted and snarl around the top of its head, framing the cracked and decaying bone and limply hanging jaw that composed the rest of its body. Its body seemed to be made of twisted branches and vines. I screamed, shuffling backwards and scrambling for my car keys on my nightstand beside my bed. I grabbed them, turning and bolting out of the cabin straight to my car, not even stopping to gather up my stuff. I turned the key in the ignition, and I was confronted with the terrifying creature standing straight ahead of me, fully illuminated by the headlights of the car. Without hesitation, I threw the car in reverse and spun around, speeding down the dirt road as fast as I could, and never daring to check my mirror. I didn't stop until I was back in my apartment. After making it back inside, I checked my phone to see if I was able to take any pictures so that I could show or tell anybody about what happened without them thinking I was crazy. But there was nothing there. I'm still not sure exactly what I saw back there or what it was that I discovered. But all I know for sure is if you ever find a staircase in the woods, turn and run away as fast as you can. So this happened in the summer of 2020. I live in Colorado, and me and my buddy were both laid off because of the you-know-what, and we decided to go on a 22 or so mile hike in the mountains. It was this fairly well mapped out trail that was at about 12,000 feet elevation, and we figured that we're going to be out there for 2 nights. The first night we're exhausted, but we're making good time. We hike a bit off the trail and we set up a campsite. We marked the area where we went off the trail so we could find it again the next morning. Everything seems normal, so we go to get back on the trail that we marked, and we see this guy. We figure that he's homeless, but he's just sitting by a tree on the trail, waiting for us to come out. We try and talk to him, but there's no response. He just stares at us. Both of us were a little freaked out at this point. He looks like he's covered in dirt and possibly blood. We continue to hike and just leave him there, but we continue to keep our eyes peeled. The rest of the day is very uneventful. We have actually almost finished our hike, and we're going to set up camp mid-afternoon and just relax. We plan to smoke some weed, but before we do that, we still gotta find a place to set up camp. So eventually we go about 1.5 miles off the trail into the woods, and before we even settle in, this guy shows up again, just from out of nowhere, and whenever he walks by, he doesn't make a sound. We have no clue how he found us. We figure that he must have tracking skills. Also, we have no clue why, or how he even followed us for 9+ miles of rough terrain. No equipment or anything, especially without us knowing we were being followed. My buddy is enraged at this point. The guy just starts mumbling weird sounding gibberish under his breath. I can't even tell if it's English. We decided to leave the area, so we just hurry up and pack. The entire time, he is just standing there and watching us from 10 feet away. We finished the last bit of the hike in the light jog for like 4 miles. We're totally exhausted because of the elevation. We load up and we drive off, calling the nearest ranger station. We told him everything, but they didn't really seem to care. And if you're wondering exactly what he was saying, it was most likely incoherent stuff. But when he was just speaking nonsense, gibberish or whatever, I thought it sounded like he was speaking in some other language. He was mumbling a lot, so it was hard to tell, but it definitely sounded like there was a rhythm that I could make out sometimes, if that even makes sense. My friend, on the other hand, believes that this guy was possessed or being used as something, but God knows what. Always be careful when you go hiking or backpacking and you end up seeing the same person, well, the same stranger, twice in different locations. So I want to tell this story that I just remembered the other day. I'm still not sure what it was, but it sounds like what people in North America might call the Skinwalker, or some type of creature based on the stories that I have read. Now, I have told this story to other people, but here it goes. I would consider myself a kid back then. And by the way, this happened in the UK. So we go spend the summer at my uncle's place while he and my dad work on his house. My uncle lives with my grandmother and they have this huge house in the middle of the woods. It has a bunch of hills as well. As my dad and uncle work on the roof, I decided to go exploring in the gardens. A small clearing of land surrounds the house before it transitions into a thick woodland. I see a patch of no grass in this small area. I head over to see it, thinking that it was a log or something, but it happens to be a deer carcass, and it smells horrible. Deer are quite common in this area. I remember it. The flesh had been torn from nearly every bone, but from around the head. I start to feel a cold sweat and I just leave the area instead. I head back to the house. I climb up the roof using the ladder that was there, and I tell my uncle about what I saw. I remember him stopping as soon as I said that, and looking out towards the clearing that I was talking about. After a few seconds he says, "Don't worry about it. It's most likely a fox." Inside of my head I'm like, a fox? Are you fucking kidding me? But I do shrug it off and go inside and call it a day. Sometime later, about 2 weeks or so go by. Me and my uncle and dad head down to a local DIY store one morning to get some tools and other things. I don't remember everything we bought. This is nothing unusual, and then we head back home and have lunch. As we're eating, my grandmother says that while we were out, she saw a weird shadow, almost like an animal walking around in our driveway. She said it looks like a big dog. However, its hind legs were longer than its front. But it was just a shadow to her, so she couldn't see it very well. And me at this age, this scares the fuck out of me, and I immediately think about what I found the other day. My uncle, who had been deep in the woods plenty of times, tries to say that it was most likely a wild cat, or like a black panther or something, and that could have been a reasonable explanation, as in the 1970s, owning large cats was banned in England, so many people just decided to abandon all the animals they had by letting them free into the woods. But there was no way a big cat would go so close to our garden, not to mention our driveway, as they are very timid as far as big cats go. So I spend the next week or so nervous that I can't even go outside half the time. So a few weeks after my grandmother had sighted the weird creature, I had forgotten all about it by this point, and so would everybody else. On the final week, I have to stay at my uncle's before he and my dad have a 4-month break. The woods surrounding the house are on the side of a steep hillside, which apparently is popular with mountain bikers. Me, my dad, and my uncle decided to go into the woods because, why not? And to see how well it is for mountain biking. I completely forgot about the previous events before this, like I mentioned. So we go in through a gate at the bottom of our driveway and head into the forest. The air is musky. It's really hot, like 30 degrees, and it's also pretty dark. So after about 30 minutes into this, we're deep within the woods after heading in one continuous direction up this hill. There happens to be plenty of ways that we can go, since they're all different directions that have been left by bikers. We stop to look at our map, and all of a sudden, we hear this loud sound, and we all turn to see a good number of deer sprinting like lunatics up the hill. I was too excited about exploring to give a damn about this, but I happened to see that my uncle actually looks concerned, and he says that it's a good idea to keep heading up the hill. We get to the top of the hill, and we're outside of the woods at this point. We stay up there for a while, and my uncle says that we're gonna head back down in a few minutes. We head closer to the woods and we smell this pungent smell, something rotting. I know there wasn't any sewers up here, so I know it had to be something. We decide to head back down, and my uncle digs into his bag and he pulls out this huge blade. He then says that when he saw the deer running, that he saw something else, and that it was standing upright and had the posture of a dog or a big cat on its hind legs. In my head, I'm freaking the fuck out. I'm remembering what my grandmother said in the deer carcass. I see my dad in the corner of my eye holding a what the fuck face and almost laughing, calling my uncle crazy. Also, as a side note, ever since another one of my uncles died, I have 5 of them. 4 years prior to this, my uncle, the one I'm with now, started to act a bit crazy. So it's starting to get darker, and we start heading into the woods all the way down. My uncle is getting crazy. He is starting to squat down, telling us to be silent and to keep our eyes out. The smell continues with us all the way down. After 15 minutes or so, we can see the exit to our garden, but something is off. The lights are on. This is strange for us because the lights on the outside of the house are motion sensitive, and since our grandmother never goes outside by herself, it means that something the size of a human must have triggered them. They got a cool down time of about 30 seconds if I remember correctly. A minute later, we hear the screeching sound from about 100 meters behind us. Everyone basically jumps out of their skin, turning around to see this lanky, crooked, dark humanoid figure, about 2 meters tall from what I remember. We all completely lose our shit and start to run towards the gate. All the while, throughout this whole time, I can hear this thing running towards us as well. We run through the gate as fast as possible. When the garden lights decide to switch off, we happen to be in the pitch black and can't see anything. My dad, who's been holding my hand since we started running, pulls me nearly off my feet as he suddenly changes direction. He reaches the house and the lights turn on. We turn around to see darkness. My uncle, who was halfway down the drive when the lights turn on so we could see around us, runs up to us and says that he could see it just behind some trees, but the lights dazed him, so he lost sight of it. After about 30 seconds, the stench begins to fade. We head back inside and talk to my grandmother. We ask if she's alright. She said she's fine, but that she could hear someone talking and knocking on the doors the whole time that we were gone. After a few seconds of silence, I ask what the hell was that thing. My uncle tries to explain the big cat theory, and that it was most likely a panther standing on its hind legs. In my head, I quickly say BS, but we don't say anything else after that. We did spend 1 more week there, and then my dad and I took off. The house that my dad and uncle worked on was just completed 2 years ago. But mind you, this happened around 10 years ago, and ever since that night happened, my uncle just loaded up on all weapons and went pretty crazy. He was also diagnosed with severe depression and also some mild form of OCD soon after that as well. I guess that sight, combined with the death of his brother, really did fuck him up mentally. But as soon as he finished the house, he ended up selling it and moved into the local town. Also, as far as I know, how it looked, the most detailed description that I can give is that it had a human head. There were no antlers or anything like that. I'm not sure what the hell this was, but if anybody has any idea, let me know. My name is David Hernandez. And what I'm gonna share with you is the most terrifying experience I have ever lived. This story happened a few years ago. At that time, I lived in a place called San Jose Paso Nuevo, very close to the Cofre de Perote, in a very small town with only a few houses, and it's very quiet. Unfortunately, in this place, I lived through a terrifying experience, one that has to do with an encounter with a Nahual. For several months, many people began to report that their animals were disappearing. There was no logical explanation, because even animals disappeared during the day. This was a very serious situation, because as I mentioned, it's a fairly poor area. Losing an animal means losing a lot of money. People gather in the classroom of Don Agustin, the oldest man in the town. They began to organize to deal with all this. Some people thought it was someone from a nearby community, intending to take the animals, while others thought it was a coyote from the area. Fed up with the situation, people started to stand guard at night near the pens to catch the culprit. The first few nights, the men who stood guard swear that something made them fall deeply asleep. When they woke up, they realized that the 2 pigs were missing. Angry and upset, they began to count the lost animals in the village, and realized that a total of 52 were missing. The most affected by the situation was a man by the name of Humberto. This man had lost about 35 animals from his property, which was near the town limits by the mountain. This led people to think that maybe it was some sort of predator from the Cofre de Perote attacking the poor animals. To confirm this theory, there was the testimony of Humberto's wife. The lady recounted that one night, she went out because she heard the dogs barking. She walked around carefully and realized that a strange creature was on top of the perimeter fence. This was unlikely because the fence was almost 3 meters high, but this animal was on top and seemed to be some sort of dog. When the lady approached it, the animal jumped and ran off into the darkness. The lady told the story to the people of the town, and her husband offered a large sum of money to whoever kills this beast. My family was always short of money, so I was one of those who volunteered to stand guard on his property. That night, at around 1:30 in the morning, we were watching the goat pen because it seemed that those animals were more like. The pen was made out of stone with adobe, and we were just behind it. Soon, some of our companions fell asleep, and we didn't know how it happened. We were talking and out of nowhere, they just fell asleep. Those of us who were awake began to hear a strange noise, and we decided to prepare the weapons because we had confirmed that it was just a coyote. Maybe this was the reason why everyone else fell asleep, because in my town, it is said that these animals have some kind of witchcraft power. We were getting ready to face one or maybe several coyotes, but we were not ready to face whatever it was that appeared before us. We heard heavy footsteps, and they were gradually getting closer. It was near, and that's when we saw it. A huge creature, gray in color. It was crouching just in front of the pen. I can't explain it. This animal was maybe about 1.5 meters tall in that position, and just when we thought that its size was incredible, we were in for another big surprise. The thing stood up, and its eyes were completely white. It had only one ear and a very slack jaw. Its fangs were visible, even more so with that ugly mouth, and it looked extremely thin with fairly short fur and claws about 10 or 15 centimeters long. We didn't know what to do, and we had heard stories of nahuales from our grandparents, but it had been years since such a creature had manifested in this area. I couldn't believe a single finger. I was paralyzed with fear, just like everybody else. It stared at us for about 5 minutes, and I swear, those minutes felt like hours. Suddenly, after being completely still, the creature began to move its head up and down. In a matter of seconds, it leaped into the pen, and that made us react, so we got ready to shoot it. but all of our guns jammed. This creature lifted 2 goats and ran off. We reacted a few seconds later and started the pursuit. We were guided by the sound emitted by the goats, and the creature was headed towards the Cofre de Perote. Some of us ran while others went on horseback. Obviously, the latter group got there first. They arrived where the trail disappeared, and we arrived about 30 minutes later. Those who were already there told us that the strange creature had entered a cave about 10 meters away. I don't think anyone in the town knew of its location, because if it weren't for this situation, we would have never found the cave. We were guarding the entrance, but nothing happened. Hours passed, and it was dawn when those who had gone on horseback returned for Mr. Humberto. They told him what happened the previous night, and the priest of the town came down to the cave around 8 in the morning. He was told about the events of the previous night, and the priest blessed the place. As soon as he started blessing the place, we began to hear a man crying. The priest told us not to be tricked by it. It was a trick from the Nagual. When the priest finished praying, that's when the loud screams joined by curses were heard. We ended up deciding to seal the entrance with rocks and place several protections that the town's priest gave us. We stood guard there for 2 more nights just to make sure that it didn't come out. And during that time, we heard the same howling several times. It seemed like an animal was trapped in the cave, and all we could hear was its desperate attempts to escape. A few days had passed, and a lady with a baby in her arms came looking for her husband. She was from a nearby town called Tonalco, and she said her husband hadn't come home for several days. The last time he left, he said he was going to San Jose Paso Nuevo to buy some animals. We didn't know what to tell her. We asked what her husband did, and she replied that he bought and sold animals. She confessed that their financial situation had improved only a few months ago because they were very poor. But since her husband started this business with a friend, things had been better for them. There was no doubt in anybody's mind that this man was the same Nagual that had been stealing the animals. We told the lady that we didn't know anything about her husband. Sadly, she returned to her town, and from that day on, weird things started happening in the town. During the night times, people would hear weird noises in the middle of the night in the streets. They said they would see strange black birds perched on the roofs of the houses, and a horrible smell of rotting flesh in the early hours. To make matters worse, many people returning from work late at night would claim to see a man dressed in black walking towards that cave. The priest said that the man was the same one who came to visit his son after having experienced all this. I eventually decided to move, for I became very afraid, and every night I dreamed of that creature that I saw. I ended up asking for help from a relative who lives in Costa Rica, and he kindly let me live with him. From here, I share my story with you, and I swear, it's not a joke. If you visit the town of San Jose Paso Nuevo, you can hear the same exact story from the mouth of many people. Most days the walls are empty, bare, that shade of black that I hated so much, that I told her made it look like our bedroom was a witch's coven, which in turn only made her love it even more. She said she always wanted to be a witch, ever since she was a little girl. And then she pressed herself against me and asked me if I had any issue with witches, especially ones who could do this. And then it didn't take me long to shut up and forget all about it. But some days, if I'm lying very still and holding the stone in my hands, the walls open. I'm not sure how to explain it. It's as if the paint gets darker and darker, and somehow thicker, more tangible, as if it expands in all directions, getting deeper and wider, and slowly it yawns out in front of me, going back and back until I see them. I think they're poplar trees, thin and with white trunks, reaching up into this new darkness with empty branches. Once I see the poplars, I know it's time to get up. That's when the wall is, I suppose, no longer a wall, but something else. And when I step off my bed, the floor is not wood. The first few times it happened, I didn't go very far. I would maybe walk a few minutes before turning around. I would explore in one direction or the other. This strange and secret wood that appeared in the walls of my home, it seemed, for the most part, to stay the same. It felt vacant somehow, as if something was missing here that was present in the real world. But as I spent more time there, that feeling grew less and less. I don't think I had much in the real world, not anymore at least. Not after Mary got sick, and her skin shrunk around her bones and the hollows of her cheeks. Both of her wrists were turned to pale twigs. Her breathing grew rasping, pain, not even after we were told that she didn't have much longer, that despite their best efforts there was nothing they could do, and that we maybe had a month, just a single month to squeeze in what was meant to be a lifetime. I could only tell her I loved her so many times, only spend so long holding her as she lost weight. Try to pretend I didn't care, trying to pretend I didn't know she cried in secret, and try not to admit how scared she was. Once, she confessed to me, after a sleepless night, that she had spent vomiting into a plastic bowl, in a voice small and scared that she didn't want to die, that she was so scared sometimes she couldn't breathe and she thought she'll do anything to make it stop. The worst part was I couldn't do anything. I didn't know what to say to that, or what would help. The truth was unavoidable, real. I didn't know her family well, and at the funeral they seemed to avoid my eye contact. She had always said they were strange, had never wanted me to meet them, had said that there were things buried there that she did not want to uncover. They wore funny clothes, they smelled like strange herbs, and they spoke in whispers at the service. It hurt even more, the thought that there was this whole part of her life I knew nothing about, and that I would know nothing about. And then it would hit me, how much we still had to do, how much more of her there was to love that I never found time to. And I would close my eyes until the feeling went away. The funeral had been in the morning, and I sat by her grave until it grew dark. I read parts of her favorite books out loud, parts of Frankenstein, Rosemary's Baby, that she had underlined several times, pages that she had folded the corners of and left, in her handwriting, tiny exclamation marks and love hearts, pages that she had marked with little drawings, all packed into the little margins. I loved her for that, always filling the spaces that should have been empty. Her grandmother had stayed for a while, her eyes entirely white, blind, I assume, and without saying a single word. I don't know if she knew I was there, or if she thought she was alone, but we stood for an hour at least together. There was something about her I couldn't place. She moved as if she didn't quite belong in this world, as if reality. Then she bowed her head, said something in a language that I didn't understand, and she left by the tombstone, a black pebble. We hadn't moved in yet. Most of our stuff was still scattered across the country, some at my parents', some in our old flats, some at various friends. Our house was bare, except for the bed and the basic appliances. I had, at the time that she died, nothing of hers but the books in my bag, the clothes in her closet, and a hole in my stomach that I thought would never go away. And so I took the stone. I know, I shouldn't have, but it felt like an artifact of her life. Somehow it felt as if by taking it I could hold on to her for a little longer, that I could have something that was hers, was meant to be hers, and that maybe she wouldn't slip away so fast. I almost fell, as if she might come back for it. I had this image in my head that she would walk up the stairs one morning, flushed from a run or with breakfast, and she would say that was her stone, and that she would stay a while, perhaps the whole day, that it would give her an excuse to come back from wherever she was, and just be with me, until she had to go back. I started spending more and more time in the forest. Sometimes I would go for hours, just wandering around the trees, listening to the faint sound of a brook somewhere. Closing my eyes and focusing on feeling nothing, I discovered a small hill. If you climbed for long enough, there was a spot where the trees thinned, and you could see the forest around you. Endless white needles from the black soil, stretching on in every direction. I saw the brook. I had only heard it up until that point, following the trail it cut. That is where I saw her, washing her hands in the brook, humming something slow and sad to herself. At first, I thought I might have gone mad, thinking that delusion finally caught up to me, finally dragged me under. But no, I was sure that was her. I was sure my mind couldn't recreate all of her. The way she bit her lip as she thought, the way she hummed with her mouth slightly open, so it sounded a little bit like singing, the small perfections I recognized, but could not name. I had no other choice. I ran towards her. I shouted her name over and over, "Mary!" And she looked up, and suddenly seemed so terrified, and she shouted that I couldn't be here, that I must not be here, that this place wasn't meant for me. I tried to shout back, but the noise had been caught in my throat, and the air ate my words, and I was mute, and I felt my legs grow denser and heavier, and the closer I got, the more I could see how scared she looked. I was convinced that she needed saving, and as I grew close, I felt the world around me shimmer. I stumbled and found myself in bed. I had been so close. From then on, it was an obsession, finding her. I would spend days in the woods looking for any signs, climbing hills, mapping the whole forest in my mind, following the stream until it led to a lake. Still, nothing. Just a vast black landscape, dotted with white trees. If I turned before entering the forest, I would be able to see my body, still lying in bed, facing the ceiling, and it was the same when I returned. Sometimes I would come back to find my parents or friends surrounding me, eyes wide open, and they'll be talking to me softly, telling me it was okay, that I was okay. And I would have a moment before I climbed back into my skin and bones that suddenly felt so heavy to watch as they touched my hair and held my hand, and I did nothing but stare into space. As I went deeper into the forest, it began to change. The trees got thicker, taller. I also began to get the feeling that I wasn't alone. Not just that Mary was here, somewhere, but that something else was. I could sometimes smell it, musk, sharp, among the cool dirt. It was something heavy that bruised the bark of the trees as it passed. It could smell me, the heat and the scent that I would leave behind. I knew that much, and I would often retrace my steps, heart pounding, as I made my way back to the bed, to find that it had torn the trees behind me, uprooted them, and stripped them of bark. I imagined what it would do if it found me, what it would do if it found something that wasn't made from cold wood, but that was made of flesh and bone, and warm. The longer I spent there, the most present it grew. I would see huge antlers through the gaps in the trees, a humanoid figure making its way to the base of the hill I was climbing. I would hear low moans from somewhere behind me. I figured it didn't want me there. It was out to find me, or worse, Mary, before I could even find her. If I hadn't wanted so desperately to see her, I might not have returned, but it became a compulsion. If the walls wouldn't change, I would just wait. I would move my thumb over the surface of the stone in long, slow circles, keeping completely still, as if moving would somehow break the spell the stone was casting. But this beast got smarter, faster. I know it was waiting for me when I came, and sometimes I would have to double back on myself, waiting for the sound of it crashing through the trees to fade, or for its low and mournful groans to fade completely. Sometimes I felt there was more than one. I would hear the groans echo, bursting from the trees in the distance at various points, A whole pack making that strange sound, searching, maybe for each other. In my worst moments, I thought they were maybe communicating about me, that they were somehow all grouping together to find my position, that one would come crashing through the trees, all rotting skin and bone, and it would pin me down and try and burst me open like a fruit. And when these thoughts came, I would have to steady myself against the trees and remember to breathe. But I kept going. I next found her by the shores of the lake. She was washing her hair slowly. I watched her for a while before saying something, watching the way she pursed her lips slightly as she concentrated, the way her back was arching when she would lean back. I moved out from behind the tree and asked her what I've been thinking this whole time. Asked her what she was doing here. She said she was waiting, that she was waiting here for me, but that I shouldn't be here. Not yet. That I have so much more to do. She kept going, telling me that I was wasting it all by being here. That this was a sad and lonely place and I shouldn't have come. That I should have never came. She said if I stayed here too long I would forget why I came. My memories would leak from my mind like gas. I would forget there was anything outside the forest. That I would forget that the world wasn't just endless black soil and black water. And that she would hear me. Not saying her name but moaning into the night. And, as if on cue, there was the noise of a beast in the distance. And I realized what a lonely sound it was. How confused and sad and searching it was. She said she would wait here for as long as it took, but that I shouldn't return until I had to, until I had no other choice. She said that she loved me, said that she knew I loved her, but that there were others who needed loving too. And as she spoke, the forest grew thin around me, as if it had the texture of smoke, and behind it, I could see my parents. And my friends sat around my bed, talking in whispers, holding my hand, stroking my hair, watching over my body, as it was staring with eyes wide open at the ceiling and did not move. I told her I was scared, that I didn't want to go, that if I become a beast at least I would be with her, and she shook her head. I tried to say something, one last thing, but I couldn't think of anything fitting, of anything that could sum up everything that I wanted to so much to say. As I opened my mouth, it wasn't in the forest, but in my bed. And then I sat up, sobbing, so much that I couldn't even speak, and I could feel arms around me, and could hear their words. And even though I couldn't turn off whatever had just sprung open inside of me, I knew, at least, that I was loved. I stayed like that for a few hours, sobbing so much that I couldn't even breathe. I couldn't think of anything, until slowly I settled. I took the stone back the next day, placing it where it had been left all that time ago. I could have sworn, though, that when I went to leave, in the space between the trees on the edge of the graveyard, for a quick second, I saw the figure of her grandmother, those white eyes fixed on me, as if she was watching. I renovated the house instead. I painted over the black walls of the bedroom. I take it day by day. Sometimes I find myself wishing I had the stone, and I'll catch myself lying in bed for hours, seeing if I can will myself back into that place. But for the most part, I have put it behind me. I'll see her again when the time comes, and until then, I have to keep myself busy. I imagine the low, sad moan I heard so often in that place, and I know that I have to find my reasons not to join them, that each day I have to find reasons not to join a beast between the trees. The small room that was going to be the nursery, I have now filled with her books. I painted it black, which I felt she would have wanted. From time to time, I'll come into it, pick a book at random and flick through, less to read the book itself and more just to see her handwriting, her tiny drawings, and thoughts that are packed into the margins. Sometimes, if I had a rough day, or have only barely made it out of bed, I'll find something new in the margins. The ink still new, a little note, or heart, or thought, and I'll know that she's not gone, really. And if I close my eyes and concentrate, I'll be able to hear it faintly, the song that she was singing by the lake, and I'll know that she's singing for me. I was out camping in the Northeast, and this one specific time that I'm talking about, I ventured off the main trail to try to find a more comfy spot to set up. So I found my spot. I ate, and I did everything that I had to do before going to bed. In the middle of the night, something wakes me up. I figure it's some sort of animal, but then I hear something else. It sounds like kids. I figure there must be a family camping out, but I think it's kind of messed up that a kid would be on their own in the middle of the night, away from their parents' sight. So I get up. I follow the sounds of the kid, maybe 50 meters from camp through the woods. The kid is hiding beneath the brush. I can hear him. And then I get around it, and there's nobody there. Then I hear this loud animal snort behind me, and then branches breaking and something on two legs tearing ass off to the right. I couldn't see anything. I was scared, but I realized that maybe it was some sort of animal, and I could be hearing it wrong because I got startled. But then I got scared again when I realized that there was no kid. So I walked back to my tent, and I'm a few steps away from when I realized that there are now huge claw marks. I'm talking like 3 claws that were an inch apart on some of the closest trees to my tent. They were just above the height of my head, and I'm 6'1". That's when I hide in my tent, and nothing happens for the rest of the night, especially me sleeping. I decide to leave as soon as it's light outside. I stop at the very first local bar that I can find for some day drinking. The old man at the bar is Mexican, and he says, "Oye, ¿estás bien, mijo? You okay, son?" I tell him that I was camping and I got no sleep. Then he said, "¿Y eso por qué? Why is that?" And I tell him what happened, and he gets a serious face and says, "My people tell legends of things in the forest, but this is weird. They don't really bother people. I'm telling you, don't go into the woods without protection. I know I don't, because you never know what's out there. Cuídate. Take care of yourself." After getting let go at my office job, I was trying to find other means to pay the bills. Unfortunately, not a lot of places were hiring in my area, and the places that were accepting applications were giving out low wages that would just barely cover my living expenses. As the days increased, my search was becoming increasingly limited, until I came across the posting in search of a security guard. It was for a nationally based security company, and they hire people based on the needs of the area. When there's an influx of security requests, it opens up for new applications. To be honest, I wasn't sold on the idea, but the pay was a bit more than the other places that were hiring. The only drawback I could find were the requirements. It was my understanding that I would be assigned to various locations during my time there. One day, I might sit outside a strip mall, and another, I may be walking around a junkyard. I had to think about it for a few moments before typing up and sending off my application. A week went by without any word, and my job hunt continued. I was sure there were more people far better qualified for doing the job, so I tried not to feel too bad about getting overlooked. Then, at the end of the week, I received an email letting me know that I was scheduled for an interview the upcoming Monday. Monday morning arrived. I put on a clean suit and showed up bright and early for the interview. The senior supervisor was a large man sitting behind a desk with multiple stacks of paper on it. He had a very serious demeanor as he looked through my application. He asked me a few passing questions and continued to look through the paperwork. I had no idea if the interview was going well or poor. I just sat there patiently waiting. After a couple more minutes, he looked up from the paperwork and smiled at me. He asked when I would be available to start, and I told him as soon as possible. He nodded and explained that I would be trained over the course of a month. Then I would be dispatched out to various locations for a set amount of time. I thanked him. I shook his hand and I left. That feeling of relief returned as I hopped into my car and drove home. I've been working for the security company for nearly 2.5 years. During my time with this job, I encountered some pretty odd things and guarded even stranger locations. But the reason I'm writing this is due to a job that occurred about a week ago. I had received a call from my supervisor informing me that I had just gotten assigned to a new location. I asked what sort of job that was, and he said it was just a small warehouse. Apparently, the company that owns it had concerns about theft happening after hours. My boss told me that we were pretty short on manpower, so unless I specifically requested some assistance, I'll be flying solo for the most part. To be honest, I didn't mind being alone for a few nights. The job began on a Tuesday. It took me a bit longer than expected to navigate the streets to the warehouse, even with a GPS. After nearly an hour of driving, I pulled into a small back lot and hopped out of the truck. I stood outside the looming warehouse, so much for it being small. I took out the keys that I had picked up beforehand and entered the rear door. I noticed the security system on my right beginning to beep, and I quickly disarmed it. I flicked the light switch and turned. When I did, I nearly jumped out of my skin. There was a face directly in front of me. I took a step back, almost falling back out the door. Catching my breath, I realized what type of warehouse this was. It was a mannequin storage warehouse. There were hundreds of mannequins of all shapes and designs standing around the building, their formless faces, all desperately trying to grab the attention of any would-be shopper. I zipped up my jacket and rubbed my eyes and began getting a lay of the land. There were a few offices towards the back and workbenches set up throughout the space. Many crates lined the walls, but apart from the mannequins themselves, everything appeared to be normal. I spent the first evening just hanging around inside my truck. I would periodically check the back door but saw nothing out of the ordinary. At around 2:30 in the morning, I was catching up on some Netflix on my phone when I heard a sound coming from outside. My attention was instantly pulled to the door of the warehouse. The sound of a door shutting. I turned off my phone. I got out and walked over to the door. I pulled the door open and peeked inside with my flashlight. Nothing immediately stood out. I called out to the interior, asking if anyone was in here, but not a single sound filled the silence. I checked my watch and returned back to my truck. I only had a few hours left before I could head home. I angled my truck to face the door and made a point to keep a better eye on it until the end of my shift. I saw nothing out of the ordinary, and at the end of my shift when I went to lock up, I thought one of the mannequins had moved slightly, but quickly buried the thought before heading home. The next 2 days on the job went about as normal as you would expect. No noises, no sign of entry or exit, just a lot of time sitting around doing nothing. Then, on the third day, I showed up to the warehouse a bit later because I woke up late. The time was close to 10:30 p.m., a good hour and a half past when I was supposed to be there. I had been late a handful of times over the 2 years working for this company, and it's really not a big deal. I parked and went to check the interior, and that's when I noticed something strange. As I put the key into the door, I didn't feel any resistance. I twisted the knob, and the door popped open. Whoever works here must have forgot to lock up after their shift. I stepped inside to disable the alarm and nearly fell on my ass as I saw a mannequin standing immediately to my right. It was arranged in a walking pose, with its right arm reaching out towards me. I quickly regained my composure and picked it up and moved it a few feet away so I could reach the system. I disabled it. I walked around and inspected the area again. Nothing caught my attention. I resumed my routine of sitting outside and keeping watch until my shift was over. When I went back inside to set the alarm again, I gave one more glance around, and everything was fine, until my light cascaded over the mannequin that I had moved at the start of my shift. It was standing straight up, with its arms at its sides, and its head was now looking towards the door. I pretended not to notice. I set the alarm, and I quickly stepped outside, locking the door behind me. I lightly jogged back to my truck, and once inside began to question what I saw. That mannequin was definitely in a different position at the beginning of the night, and I didn't adjust it, aside from moving it a few feet. I drove home and drank a nice tall glass of whiskey before drifting off to bed. The last day made me question whether or not to continue being a security guard. I showed up on time and went inside to check things out. There were more mannequins than on the first day, and I just assumed that they had brought more in. After my once over, I returned to my truck and began to watch a TV show on my phone. About 45 minutes into the series, I glanced up and saw something that sent goosebumps down my arms. The door to the warehouse was completely open. I got out and walked over to it. I stepped inside with my flashlight and called out asking if anyone was in here. I waited for a moment, and just when I was about to close the door and head back to the truck, the sound of something clattering in the back rang out. I felt myself jump in my skin. Something had to have caused that noise, I thought. I called out once more, summoning every ounce of courage in me to step inside. I turned the light switch on and looked around. Everything seemed fine, aside from the mannequins. I walked to the back where I heard the noise and found a small paint can resting on its side. Only there was nothing around it, not even any mannequins. I turned back to the door, and I kid you not, I watched as a mannequin stepped into my vision and pulled the door shut, while another one reached out and flicked the light switch. I shouted, dropping my flashlight in the process. I could hear the clattering of plastic and metal hitting the ground as I stood there frozen in the dark. Regaining my senses, I quickly knelt down and searched for my flashlight. My hand rested on what I assumed to be the flashlight, but it felt different. It was in the shape of a plastic foot. I recoiled back into my side and felt my flashlight next to me. I picked it up, pointing it in front of me. There were 4 mannequins all standing around me, their heads twitching to the left and right real fast, like they were trying to listen for sounds without ears. One of them reached out for me, and I scrambled backwards. When I did, I bumped into something solid. I turned, flashlight in hand, and saw another mannequin looming over me. Unable to react, and in that moment of hesitation, I felt a sharp impact on my neck. My vision went wide, followed by darkness. Sometime later, I awoke. My head was spinning. As I regained focus, I realized I was now sitting in my truck. I quickly looked around, wondering how I ended up back in here. I began to wonder if I had possibly fallen asleep in my truck, and that whole ordeal was just some sort of nightmare. The next morning, I received a call from my boss, saying that the warehouse owner said that I had left the door unlocked the previous night. I apologized to him for the mistake, and he brushed it off, saying it wasn't that much of a big deal. I then told him that I wanted to use some of my vacay time and take off for a while. He understood and said it would be fine. Just before we got off the phone, however, I suggested not taking any more jobs from that location. He attempted to ask why, but all I could say was, the mannequins don't seem to like security guards. He took it as a joke and chuckled before telling me to enjoy my vacay. I'm not exactly sure what happened, if it was all in my imagination or not, but I think I'm gonna pass on guarding warehouses, at least for a while.